Here we are, guys, the Beckman's breakdown on the World Championship 2025. It's going to be, I don't know, probably a long episode. There's so much to talk about. There was so much that went on, but I want to say from the outset that it was a fantastic event. I have to give credit to the French Badminton Association. They put on one hell of a show. The visuals were brilliant. All the dance for all the finals, the lighting show on the courts. The crowd support were loud. Obviously, when the French players were on, they were absolutely mental with the giant cutout heads. But even when there weren't any French players, the crowd really got behind any match that was decent. And I just thought it was just a really fantastic atmosphere. And it boosted some of the amazing matches, which, in all honesty, there were numerous. So many, in fact, that I haven't had a chance to watch every single one of them. I think if you had to sit down and watch every single amazing match from these World Championships, it would take you a long time. In the early rounds, it really was so many times where I was like, do I watch this one or that one? And I'm trying to watch both, but then you can't do that. And it's just, there were so many amazing matches. But on top of that, obviously, these World Championships has so much else, and obviously that's what I want to talk about. We had some really amazing performances. We had some questionable ones too. Obviously we had a number of controversies and stuff like that, umpiring decisions. This is badminton. Obviously we had major upsets. We had redemption arcs being completed. We had new stars bursting onto the scene completely out of nowhere. We had previously never done things before, records being equaled, historic firsts. Absolutely, the list just goes on and on and on. So I'm going to do my very best in this episode of Beckman's Breakdown, the show where I take a look at all of the badminton events from BWF World Tour Super 500 up into the majors, and obviously the World Championships is one of those majors. I think the best place to start this video, though, is obviously, as you all know, I'm sure some of you did watch, that I did a prediction video before these World Championships where I basically gave who I felt would come through each semi-final, so who would reach the semi-finals, and I'd also gave a couple of dark horses. So I think the best place to start this video is to go through those predictions and see how I did. And I think off the top of my head, I did okay. But yeah, no, let's start with that. But before I get into them, as always in these episodes, I have to do a little plug for my Beckman's Breakdown merchandise. At the moment, I'm currently wearing the hoodie. The weather in England is starting to get a little bit cooler. I can finally wear these hoodies. I think in the last episode I was sweating badly in just a t-shirt. It's definitely a little bit cooler now. But if you want to buy any of these Beckman Breakdown merchandise, then click the link in the description below. There's still 20% off. If you do buy it, not only do I think you'll enjoy it, I think the quality is very, very high, but you'll be supporting myself and the channel. And also you'll be supporting the guy that creates it, the owner of Matchy Clothing, Max Duell, who's an aspiring young badminton player from Holland. So, you'll be helping two people within the badminton sphere. But if you don't want to buy it, you can't afford it, you don't like it, it's too simple, whatever, that's also fine. If you're just watching this video or whatever, you leave a comment, a like, a share. For me, honestly, that is more than enough. I just hope that people get something out of these videos that I do. I still can't quite believe I amassed such an audience just talking about badminton to a camera like this. So, introduction out of the way, I'm going to get into my predictions, and I'm going to start with the men's singles. So, men's singles, let's start with the dark horses. Let's start off on a real bad note for me, because all my dark horses all fell in the first round. Two of them were understandable. One of them was quite surprising. So that surprising one was Koki Watanabe. He lost to Azerbaijan's Dwichayo, I believe his name is, Adi something. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. I know he's obviously a former Indonesian player, but he's been in Azerbaijan for a long time. He's played like the European Games, European Championships, all those kind of tournaments. And he's definitely someone that I wouldn't say I overlooked it. I just felt that it's not like I didn't think that he had a chance against Koki. I just thought that Koki would win that match, even though I thought actually it was a pretty good draw for Koki in terms of actually getting a first round that was going to be somewhat challenging, but actually going to help him get into the hall right from the word go, which would help him further on, which is actually another reason why I picked him as dark horse. But, he felt, I didn't actually see the match. It wasn't until someone messaged me saying, oh, your dark horse is all out. And I went, nah, we've got still Koki. And then I realised he was out. And I was like, okay, not good. But My other dark horses were Anthony Ginting and Li Zijiang. I picked them because obviously they're what I know and what we all know they're capable of. Former, I think both been former world number twos. Both been Olympic bronze medalists. And I know they've only just started coming back to competition. But I still felt that with their potential, that maybe they could, if they got 1 or 2 wins under their belt. They both had tricky first rounds. If they could get through those, then maybe we could see them have a bit of a deep run. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. For Li Zijiang, he lost to Jin. And in terms of that match, I thought Jin actually had a pretty good tournament. He played pretty well until he came up against another guy I'll talk a bit later on, Victor Lai. But very steady player, and I just think that for me, with Li Zijiang, obviously he's going to be a little bit rusty. He hadn't played in competitions, and from what I can gather, the conditions inside the arena were very tricky to play. So coming back for your first tournament to the World Championships is not easy to begin with. There's always going to be those expectations on your own shoulders and from other people as well. And then add to that the conditions are a little bit tricky to play. And I actually think in the first rounds though they were a little bit easier. They got harder as the week went on. But and then you're coming up against an opponent who not only has beaten you but is one of those awkward players. For me, Li Zijiang, he looked quite confident. He was moving well. I don't think his ankle was any sort of issue, and I think he admitted that afterwards that he was just glad that he got through the match without an injury, which I think is definitely a positive. He just looked a little bit slow, and I thought his defence just was a little bit off. But those are things you'd expect when you haven't played for very long. And the touch shots as well, just a little bit extra tightness on the spinning net shots, or a little bit more sharpness, lifting into the corners or playing your cross-court net shots, all that kind of stuff. Those are the kind of things that when you've been away for a long time, even if you have been training and practicing, they take a little bit of time to get back your touch and your feel for a court. I like to call it that, when you're playing, if you haven't played for a while, sometimes the game can feel faster, your eyes aren't quite there. You know what you need to do, you can kind of see it, but it's just a fraction late. Or you might be, when you're really into it, say in singles, you're thinking of 1 or 2 shots on your opponent. You're not too concerned with maybe a few others. But when you haven't played for a while, for some reason, just in the back of your mind, you start thinking about those others, and that can make you just that little bit slower, a little bit. It would look to the regular viewer that it looked like you were a little bit slow to react, but really it's just you are seeing things a little bit slow. You're not quite used to that speed, especially under tournament conditions. But your mind slightly focuses on 1 too many things at the same time. But with more practice, you start to laser that focus a little bit more. And obviously, when your shot quality gets a little bit higher, that also becomes easier. So I think, in all honesty, if you're a Li Zijiang fan, I think the way he was moving, the fact he wasn't in any pain, discomfort, he was moving okay, just a little bit slow, and his defence was a bit off. I think with just more matches, he can get that back, and so I don't think you should be too worried. I think the fact that it was obviously his first tournament back, we should definitely give him plenty of time. Easily, I'd say, the next few tournaments, if not to the end of the year, a little bit like what I said about Anthony Ginting. Talking of Ginting, I've just got my notes here on the match. That was a fantastic match, him against Tomo Jr. Popov. For me, I think, again, if you're a Ginting fan, you should be very, very pleased. There's obviously one thing that I'll get to right at the end that's maybe a little bit disheartening, but based on what I saw of him in the Japan and China Open, where it was okay, he was showing, some of the old Ginting stuff. It was obviously, like I said about Li Zijiang, just lacking that little bit of sharpness, that little bit of consistency, not quite seeing the game quite as quickly as he usually would. But in this match, obviously those previous 2 tournaments did help. He came into this tournament looking much, much better, much, much faster, and he was playing some really, really good badminton. I think also the fact that obviously he had the crowd heavily against him, and he was playing against an inspired Tomo Jr. Popov. I think the performance he put in was really, really good. He definitely didn't have luck on his side. I will say that. If you think, I think it was in the 3rd game, what did he get, like 3 broken strings? Or it was throughout the match, there was a period where he had like 3 broken strings really, really close to one another. And then when he had match point at 2019, that slip that he had, You know, he hit a good smash, and I think had he not slipped, he might have been able to maintain, obviously, the advantage in that rally and possibly could have won that point. So that was unfortunate, and obviously that slip, I think, did actually tweak something in his ankle because, you know, the last 2 points, his ankle obviously got worse and worse, and he couldn't even move. I think that he made an error on the last point because he smashed it in the net because he actually couldn't jump up, and then we saw him hobbling. And then there was that nice moment between the two players where, instead of celebrating, which you'd expect when it was like 25-23 in the third at a World Championships against your own crowd, Thomas came across the net to check that Ginting was okay. I thought that was an absolutely really lovely moment. So yeah, no, it's a shame that the match ended that way, and you know, like I said, it was a shame for Ginting and his fans. I'm one of those. I really like watching Ginting. That Lady Luck wasn't quite on his side, but overall, the match was of very high quality, and Ginting was playing. He still had those patches where he would just make a few errors, go off the boil, but it wasn't ever that devastating. You know, if he did like say 3 or 4 in a row, he was then able to get it back together and kind of re-find his form and recompose himself, which I think, again, if you look a little bit beyond this tournament, you could easily see this tournament as a failure for Ginting. You know, even though he wasn't the favourite in this match, you'd still kind of think that he had a good chance, and that, you know, a first round loss at the World Championship for a player of his level and what he's achieved in the past, you know, it's easy to see that as a failure. But if we look at it in terms of his progression and then looking further forward, I think it's a really good sign. I thought he was playing generally with good shot quality. He was playing very attacking badminton. He was playing a style that I think, if it continues to improve, he's definitely going to be a handful for a number of players. And I don't think his time is up yet. I really do hope that injury, though, his ankle isn't too bad. It doesn't put him back for, you know, another set period of time, because that will be really hard to come back from. You know, like if you just come back from a long layoff for an injury and then, 3 tournaments in, you get another one that leaves you out for quite a while, then that's obviously not going to be, that's psychologically very difficult to come back from. But no, I think overall that was an absolutely fantastic match. Yeah, it was a shame it ended that way, but so yeah. Anyway, like I said, my dark horses for my singles weren't too good. Moving on to my main predictions, at the top of the draw was Shi Yuqi. Obviously, Shi Yuqi ended up winning the tournament. I am going to do a section on the finals, so I'm not going to talk about kind of the latter stage matches too much at the moment. But obviously, he came through just here. His route through to winning that final was a real rocky one. You know, like a lot of up and downs. He played pretty well in his opening round against Lakshya Sen. We all know they had that moment at 19-all where it did hit the floor and the umpire missed it. But then he managed to obviously win the next 2 points and win it. You know, that situation could have got a little bit ugly from had he lost that second game. Maybe that could have thrown him, but he came through that. I can't remember who he played after that, but then he had Christo Popov, who was playing some absolutely brilliant badminton, really, really fast, really, really attacking. And she looked incredibly nervous. He kind of like showed the kind of level we saw of him in the Olympics when he lost to Kunlavut. You know, kind of like not quite playing his favourite shots, looked a little bit heavy at times, a little bit sluggish. And Christo was, like I said, he was flying around. He had the crowd behind him, and he was moving, and he was the one dictating the pace. But Shi Yuqi, in all credit to him, was able to cling in there and kind of fight his way through for the win. And then the quarterfinals against Wang Hongyang, I didn't see that match. I wasn't overly interested in that one. I think there were other quarterfinals that I was watching at the time, but looking at the scores, that looked a little bit up and down too. And then obviously we got through to the semis. I'll talk about, I think I'll come back to that a little bit later on. So Shi Yuqi was a prediction for mine that came true, so I think that's 1 point to me. The next one I did pick Lo Qianyu, which was a little bit of a one out there, but I felt that with his head-to-heads against the seeded players in his section, the fact that main seed was Li Shifeng, and I felt that, you know, he was susceptible you're never quite sure what you're going to get with Li Shifang. He can be incredibly inconsistent. And that proved quite true because Yushi Tanaka of Japan beat Li Shifang in one of the biggest upsets on day one. He played a brilliant match there, Yushi Tanaka, playing really, really fast, good attacking badminton, and he controlled the front court really, really well. That was where I think he managed to kind of get the majority of the control. It's usually when it comes to these close matches between two good players, it usually can come down to one, maybe two things on the tactical side, and I think Tanaka played the front court really, really well and played very, very attacking badminton. Very, very explosive and fast, sharp attacks from the back of the court. And I think Li Shifang's attack was working to begin with. It was powerful, but it became a little bit predictable. And I think Yushi Tanaka's defense and then front court kind of took away Li Shifang's weapons, and Tanaka ran out winner. So I felt with those kind of things that Lo Kin-Yu had a really good chance to come through, and he was proving me true. And also if you add to that, also I think Lo Kin-Yu's made some real improvements under his new coach from Korea. I think being a little bit more, having more of a game plan in general. If things aren't working, there's a plan B. He can always resort to playing a very simple, basic consistency game, and he did that when he played against Naraoka. That was a bit of a scrappy game, in all honesty, when he played Naraoka in the third round. It looked like both players weren't, they're both players that are very, very fast, but they weren't particularly moving particularly quickly a lot of the time in that match. They both looked a bit heavy-legged, which for me is a sign of nerves. I think they both knew that. I think if we look at that stage, they saw who the opposition will be in the quarters, and it was going to be the winner between the unknown Victor Lai and Junhyuk Jin. And I think both players saw that as wow, here's a real good chance. If we win this, I'm going to be the favourite to get back into the medals. And I think that's what we saw when we saw those two play. It was a little bit scrappy, but it was Lo Kin-Yu that managed to, with a little bit of luck on his side, and played some of the big points slightly better. He had that little bit more in the attacking game and was able to come through that. But Lo Kin-Yu didn't make the semi-finals because Victor Lai, the sensation of the tournament, was able to defeat Lo Kin-Yu in the quarters. I didn't actually see all too much. I can't remember what I was doing. I think I had some coaching, actually, that was it. Because that match, I think, was... Actually, I can't remember when that match was, but I know that I was coaching, or I had to do something else. Oh yeah, I was coaching because it was in the morning. One of the first matches, if not the first match of the quarterfinals on Friday. And I remember looking at the scoreline in the first, it was like 17-12 to Lo Kin-Yu, and I was like, okay, it's kind of going as it was. And then next thing I looked, it was like 22-20. Victor had won, and he was leading the second game. I was like, whoa, what the hell's happened? Then I saw that he won. And I was like, right, okay, I need to watch some of this when I get back. And then on my way back after coaching, I saw a story from Lo Kin-Yu. The whole thing that kicked off around this of Victor Lai had fallen through the court on a net shot and was on Lo Kin-Yu's side, and Lo Kin-Yu hit it out. And obviously the point, it wasn't deemed a fault by the umpire, and Lo Kin-Yu was kind of arguing this, and obviously a lot of people kind of taking to social media and stuff, and I was like, wow, when did this point happen? I didn't know. My impression was that this happened maybe at like 18 all or 17 all, real crunch time. And actually, as it transpired, it turned out it was at 8-5 in the second game. Now that's not to kind of put down the importance of that. I think what I want to say about this situation, because I feel I should address it, is there's two things. One is Steen Pedersen put something up about the rules, and I think it's not that Victor Lai was an obstruction to Lo Kin-Yu. You're allowed to kind of fall, if you hit a shuttle and then you end up slightly on your opponent's side, as long as you're not in the way, obstructing your opponent from hitting the shot, it's okay, as long as you haven't hit the net. Or obviously the shuttle's dead, but it was alive at this point. But the one that Steen pointed out was it a distraction to Lo Kin-Yu? That's where Steen said, and I would agree, that Lo Kin-Yu would have a point that maybe should have been deemed a fault. For me, it was kind of funny when I watched it though, because it was a bit strange, because it happened, And then Lo Yu kind of like, because as it happened, Lo Yu kind of fell backwards and he kind of laid there. Like almost like, Lo Yu can be a bit jokey at times. And he was kind of like joking. And then he kind of sat up like the Undertaker, like suddenly bolted upright and was pointing at the umpire going, no, hang on a minute, wasn't that a fault? So it was a bit like delayed, weird. It was kind of really, really strange how that happened. But I think there is a point to be made that maybe it should have been a fault. However, what I saw online from a vast majority of people, and I know Lo Yu doesn't agree with this, is that a lot of people were going, Victor Lai only won that match because of that situation, because that umpire's decision went in his favour. And that, for me, I just think is absolutely outrageous and quite honestly a little bit disgusting that people say that because, Lo Yu did say Victor Lai played better and he deserved the win. He's just looking for kind of integrity from the umpires, which I completely get. We all want that. And again, obviously this decision brings up the need for VAR, but that's why I mentioned the fact that it happened to 8-5, is because for me, whilst that can psychologically affect Lo Yu, you can't put Lo Yu losing down to that 1 point. It's just, you can't. The mark of a champion is being able to kind of come back from these things, but even if you give that it was psychologically damaging, I don't think you can say that's why Lo Yu lost and Victor Lai won. Because, like I said at the start here, in the first game, Lo Yu was 17-12 up, 19-15 up in that first game and wasn't able to finish it, and Victor Lai was able to come back strong and win that opening game. So that was before any of this happened. So that kind of, you know what I mean? Like, I just don't think that whenever these decisions happen, I understand if it happens at like match point or maybe right at the end, then it's a bit easier to go, well, yeah, that point was so, like say that Xiu won, say he'd lost that second game and then lost the third. Maybe you could argue, because it happened a little bit more at the crunch time, but I just don't think that you can really boil down someone winning just down to 1 point, because that's 1 point. It was 2 close games, so clearly after 8-5, Lo Yu was able to kind of get it back a little bit. But I just think if you're one of those people that will say Victor Lai only won because he was on Lo Yu's side of the court, or because the umpire didn't call that one, then I think you're a little short-sighted, and I think you're also being very disrespectful and rude to a player who, played incredibly well and deserved his world medal. And we'll talk about Victor Lai a little bit more, but I think I've spoken enough on that. So obviously Lo Yu failed to score me another point in these predictions. He did come close, but I did mention Victor Lai as a player that, was someone that we should keep an eye on. I didn't quite realise he'd be to that level, but yeah, no. Fantastic result by him. Unfortunate Lo Yu couldn't once again get amongst the medals. Next one was Kunlavut. There were some big question marks against Kunlavut and his level. After what his performances were like in Japan and China, I have to admit that there were those question marks. I thought they were very legitimate, but having said that, the major tournaments, we're talking the Olympics and the Worlds, not necessarily the Super 1000s because he hasn't quite cracked that code, but Kunlavut is very, very good, and again, he proved that here by playing, a brilliant tournament. I actually thought in that section you had Jonathan Christie, who I also had question marks against, more question marks, but then as the tournament was going on, I actually thought when it came to Christie and Kunlavut, I thought, the way Christie's been playing, I thought he was looking really strong, looking really solid. I thought, Kunlavut. And Kunlavut had scraped through against Aoi Farhan in the third round, who had another young 20-year-old like Victor Lai, had a fantastic tournament. Really, really good. Definitely someone that he's confirming more and more of why I have a lot of belief that he could be a very good player and achieve great things in badminton. But with all those factors, I did think that Christie is going to be a tricky one for Kunlavut, but Kunlavut obviously was able to come through that in 3 games, with winning the third game quite comfortably. So, and the way that Kunlavut was playing, the final, again, like I said, I'll come back to the finals, but his semi-final against Antonsen was absolutely sublime. He was in such a good playing mood, and Anderson really wasn't able to apply any sort of pressure onto Kunlavut's defense. And Kunlavut is, for me, the most talented, or skill-wise, the best technical player in all of badminton. He makes the game look so incredibly easy, and he definitely had more of a what's the word? A bit more of a spring in his step throughout this week, in general, all the way up into the final. And even in the final, he was pretty good in that as well. But yeah, no, he came through, delivered a point for me in terms of my prediction. And then Anderson, my last pick for the bottom, it was between him and Chen, which, funnily enough, was the quarter-final of that bottom section. I went with Anderson purely, if I remember rightly, because he was European. But I also felt that, in all honesty, that when it comes to these big situations, he's medalled quite consistently. At the World Championships, I think before this is 3 times he's medalled, 1 final and 2 semis, that I think he was in a good position to do that again. I felt that maybe he might try too hard, or he might just push things that little bit too much, and that kind of almost was his undoing, because against Pranoy, and then against Thomas Jr. Popov, those 2 games. The first game he won like 5 or 6 against Pranoy, and then 7 against Popov. And then for like the majority of the second game, he was fine. And then suddenly had like a mental block, almost like he started to kind of realise what he was doing, and then doubting himself. I think Steen spoke of that a lot, about how suddenly, whether he just started to think about the whole situation, and then, like I said, started to try too hard and started to get all agitated and angry and just not playing his game. He was able to still win and come through and, get into the semi-finals. But I think had any of those opposition, Pranoy, Popov or Cho, had just been able to capitalise that a little bit more, a bit like what we saw Kunlavut do in the semi-finals, I think Anderson might have struggled to get that medal. But that isn't what happened. He was able to come through. He did battle his way through, which I thought did show good character. If you play badminton at any sort of decent level, you can sympathise. I could sympathise with Anderson, that sometimes you can just play so brilliantly, you're not even thinking about it, and then you get to a stage and suddenly, for whatever reason, you're thinking about what you're doing. Before it was automatic, and you're just focused, you're just going by your subconscious, and it was flowing, you're playing, and then suddenly you can just be like, well, what if they start playing really well at this point? What if I start missing it? And then you start to just think too much and tense up, and that's exactly what happened. And again, I mentioned the conditions, but the conditions obviously made things difficult because the drift was changing all the time, so it was probably hard to get into a rhythm, and then that can throw you, and there was many other factors. We can talk about Anderson at now 28. He got to the world final when he was really, really young. When he was young, 24? No, not 24, sorry, he was like 22. And he hasn't been back in the world final since, and I think he so desperately wants one of these major ones. And that was my doubt against him, is that I've seen him in some major tournaments like the Olympics twice, some of the Thomas Cup matches, and some of the World Championships, where I think he almost tries too hard. And now he's at this stage where, not just getting older, but he's got himself into such good shape that can almost make things a bit worse, because you're in really good shape, and so it really makes you think like you're at the best chance, and put too forward, put too much. You just try too hard. But when it comes to my picks, he was able to come through. So men's singles, dark horses, none, and I got, if we call it out of 5, I know I picked 3 dark horses. You can call it out of 8 if you want. I've got 3. I picked 3, so that's 7. 3 out of 7, which isn't great, it's less than 50%. But out of the main ones, 3 of those were correct, and let's be honest here. Who could have predicted Victor Lai, world number 50, being the other semi-finalist in the men's singles? So moving on, men's doubles. So I went for Kim and So, which obviously they did come through. They won the whole tournament. They did come very close to losing in the quarterfinals when they played against Man T. That was a really tetchy match. I think the pressure was massively on. Man and T are an incredibly good pair. They almost suffered the pressure when they were playing the Popov brothers. the roles were reversed. So when Man and T got through and got into the quarterfinals, they were suddenly obviously expectations. They're like, we can beat Kim and So, but they're the top pair in the world, so there isn't the pressure. You know, we aren't expected to beat them, and I think that's why we're able to see them play more of the kind of badminton we can come to expect from them. But Kim and So were able to come through that, so that's 1 point to me. Bottom of the draw, and that's where my dark horse and one of my picks. So Ashwin Rasmussen were my pick, and Hoki and Kobayashi were my dark horse, and it was those two in the quarterfinals. So I could only have got one of those, but the fact that both of those two played each other, I think. Can you give that point to me, please? Fantastic tournament for both players. Like I said, with Hoki and Kobayashi, I've been saying this for a little while, is that I feel like they haven't had that really good result, but the level that they've been showing me has kind of been like, they're knocking on the door of getting back into like the top level. They've kind of like, obviously they were one of the best pairs in the world, they were world champions, they've been world number ones. But obviously if you were to kind of like name your top like 5 or 6 pairs, you probably wouldn't name Hoki and Kobayashi. Obviously they're not in that ranking, but you probably wouldn't even, a lot of people might not even consider them, even though what they've achieved in the past, you know, 2-time world finalists and former world champions. But for me, having watched them recently, I'm seeing signs, like I said, that they are getting their level back, that they are right there. They're just festering below the top pairs, and they had a good tournament. They beat Alfine and Ardiento in their final, no, not their final tournament, they got one more before that pair splits. But that was a really, really good win over the Indonesian pair. And Ashwin Rasmussen, again, did really, really well. They got to the semi-finals. Another fantastic result for them, considering they are like, I don't know off the top of my head, but I know Rasmussen's like a year or two younger than me, and I think Ashwin maybe a year or two younger than that. I can't quite remember, but they're definitely both pushing mid to late 30s, mid 30s. So to win another medal for them is absolutely fantastic, and they came through. I think the way they defeated Wang Qilin and his partner was impressive. Obviously in the semi-finals, they didn't have the best of times. They didn't have a very fun time against Kim and So. They had absolutely no chance. And in all honesty, when that semi-final came, I did think that, I didn't expect the score to be that one-sided, but I did think that the Danes didn't quite have anything. I was trying to think of areas where they could get the advantage, and it was just difficult. You know, Ashwin was very good at the net, but both Kim and So are just as good, if not better. I think Kim Won-ho is definitely one of the best front court players in all of badminton. Can they beat the Koreans on speed? No. Do they have a thundering attack that can really break the Koreans' defense? Not particularly. So like the pairs that I feel do really well against Kim and So are either incredibly skillful and fast, so like a Fikri, you know, able to kind of make the game incredibly quick and awkward and get Kim and So off uncomfortable in their defense, or a pair that can play really, really fast, like we saw He Ting and Ren Xiangyu do at the All England for a game in a bit, or incredibly powerful so they can smash right through it, which actually is what I thought Man and T kind of had, especially if they could get Man at the back and T at the front. You know, Man's power and then T's skills from the net, they were able to get into those situations, whereas I just felt that Ashwin Rasmussen don't quite have that. Maybe its age is beginning to catch up, but I didn't quite expect the result to be that one-sided in that semi-final. But still, Ashwin Rasmussen did absolutely brilliantly to get yet another bronze medal. In the bottom half, I had both Malaysian pairs and both of them failed. So we had Go and Ner. I actually didn't see a single match of Go and Ner, from all honesty. I can't even remember who they lost to. Let me just double check. They lost to Li Zhe and Yang Po Swan. I think when I was picking this section, I did pick Go and Ner, and the bottom section, but remember in that both those sections, I mean in all the sections it was difficult other than the top one, I remember, with Kim and So. You know, there were all pairs within that section that were all very, very good. You know, you had Kia and Sogar, who knocked out Gautama and Isfahani. You had Chen Boyang and Liu Yi, who got all the way to the final. Another surprise result from them. You had Yang Po-Xuan and Li Zhihai, who, let's not forget, before the Olympics last year, were having an absolutely fantastic time and actually were, in my mind, they were real medal contenders at those Olympic Games. And whilst since then, we haven't seen as much of them, they're still fantastic. And I think in that hall, Li Zhihai can hit the shuttle so hard. And so their attacking firepower is good. And I'm just looking at the scores. Like I said, I didn't actually watch that match. Like I said right at the start and the beginning of this video, there were so many amazing matches and so much good stuff, so many good stuff going on that obviously I did miss quite a few matches, and that was one of them, and I haven't had a chance to go back and watch it. But 23-21, so if you look at it that way, could have gone either way. Unfortunately for the Malaysian pairs, they weren't able to get through, and it was the same in the bottom half with Aranchai and Sohyik were my pick. But they lost in the quarterfinals to Ranki Reddy and Shetty. Again, another match I didn't see. Didn't see a few of those matches in the bottom half. I do need to go back and watch them. I think I will do, just because they're all exciting. But I must admit I was a little bit surprised by that, because of the head-to-heads between Ranki Reddy and Shetty and Aranchai and Sohyik, and the fact that I think the Malaysians' defence is usually very, very strong and able to kind of handle the pressure of Ranki Reddy and Shetty. But without watching, I can't comment too much. But again, the conditions inside this arena were playing a little bit more towards what they were like when it was the French Open last year, and less like it was at the Olympics. I think in the Olympics, remember rightly, it was definitely a little bit slower and less prominent with the drift, whereas maybe it's the setup, I don't know, being slightly different, even though it's the same arena or whatever the conditions were, but they were playing a lot faster. The shuttles were a little bit harder to control, and I personally think Shetty and Ranki Reddy, who obviously have an incredible attack and are generally very well organised, that might give them that little bit of edge to break through Aranchai and Sohyik's defence. And I also, whilst it's been very successful having Harry IP, the former Indonesian coach for with the Malaysians, and he's really changed the way Malaysians approach their badminton, far more attacking rather than I think what we'd always see Malaysian pairs generally defend. Maybe in these conditions it was harder to play that way, and I think maybe against Ranki Reddy and Shetty, maybe going back to an older, more defensive style that seemed to work against them in the past might have been a better thing. But again, I didn't see the match, so I can't really comment too much, but that's how I see it a little bit, is that what I'm trying to say is it's hard. But I do think the conditions did suit a pair like Ranki Reddy and Shetty a little more, who, let's not forget, like I said, I compared it to the French Open last year. They won the French Open in devastating fashion. So that's the doubles. So out of those ones, if you give me the point for Hoki and Kobayashi, because they could only, my dark horse is obviously, well, I guess with all dark horses, if they reach the quarterfinals or they face one another, you have to kind of give me maybe half a point. 50, I'd say, even if you don't count them, I got half of those predictions right. So Kim and Sir and Ashman Rasmussen got through to the semis. And I think the fact Hoki Kobayashi, I'll give myself half a point for that. So that's fair. Yeah. And so moving on to the next doubles discipline, women's doubles. So my dark horse pick here was Maya Sari and Ramadhanti. They did have Pearly Tan and Tina Muralitharan. And the fact that I think Ramadhanti and Maya Sari had pushed the Malaysians really hard a few times, that I thought that maybe they could cause a bit of an upset. But that wasn't the case. Pearly Tan and Tina Muralitharan absolutely obliterated that Indonesian pair in their match. And I guess seeing as I've started with the Indonesians would come at the bottom, I'll start at the bottom of my pick, and that was Pearly Tan and Tina Muralitharan. I did say about them that I felt that in the early rounds they'd probably be okay, but maybe in the semis or the finals, which is what we've seen them in the last few tournaments, when they get there, it's not that they play badly, but that's where maybe they hit the stumbling block. I know obviously that's obvious, you're playing, generally speaking, the better pairs, or even if it's not a top pair in the final, a pair that's obviously been playing very well that week, so that makes sense. But sometimes when I watch them, they look very, very comfortable and confident in the early rounds, and then you start to see maybe a few cracks in that as the latter rounds go around. Didn't really see that, to be honest. They played brilliantly throughout the whole tournament, Pearly and Tina. And like I said, in the early rounds, they played my Sarai and Henty and kind of proved me right by playing brilliantly and coming through there. So Pearly Tan, Tina Urson came through, fantastic. That's a point to me. Let's work our way up the draw. Matsuyama and Shida, who are in their final tournament of their partnership. You know, it was quite an emotional one, a last dance for them. I had them coming through. I think they had a potential tricky one against, was it Kim and Kong, the new Kim and Kong? And they came through that incredibly well, which I actually thought they would, because I felt that the way that Matsuyama and Shida played, the attacking game, the speed, I think, especially with when I started, when I thought about the conditions inside the Adidas Arena, I thought they might play a little bit fast before the tournament, that I thought Matsuyama and Shida, and also the fact they just had such a good year so far. You know, they won the All England, they've got to the latter stages of the majority of tournaments they played, so they're on hot form. I thought they would live up to their billing, and they did. Next I had Ri Iwanaga and Ki Nakanishi, a slightly, I wouldn't say odd pick, but I thought that they would, I don't know, there was something about them that gave me, I can't remember what my reasoning was for them. I think their head-to-heads against some of the pairs in their section was pretty favourable. I thought that the pair Lee and Liu, they would have a pretty good chance. You know, Iwanaga and Nakanishi are pretty good against the Chinese pairs. That didn't prove to be correct in the semi-final against Liu and Tan, but I felt that still before this tournament that Iwanaga and Nakanishi are a pair that do well against those sorts of pairs. And I also felt that the pair Lee So-hee and Baek Ha-na, who were the fourth seeds in that section, would struggle, and that proved to be true as they went to 3 with the French pair in the first round and then lost to Kasuma and Pratui in the second round. So Iwanaga and Nakanishi proved my faith in them correct by coming through and getting to the semi-finals. And lastly, the top one, I picked Liu and Tan, who, as you probably do know, they won the whole thing. And came through that section very, very strongly. Of course, they dropped a game to their compatriots, Zhang and Jiang. I didn't watch that match. There were other ones. The same nation matches just don't quite give me that same excitement. Although a lot of people saw that as maybe the final before the final. They're kind of the two top pairs. You know, those two pairs had faced each other, in the China Open final. The tournament, the Super 1000 before these World Championships, but still there were other matches that I wanted to watch. But Liu and Tan lived up to their billing and came through. So if you take away the dark horse out of that from my main picks, 4 out of 4, 100% on the women's doubles. Mixed doubles next. Interesting. So let's start from the top. Feng and Zheng and Wang Dongping. They didn't make the semi-finals. They fell in the second round to Matthias Christiansen and Alexandra Boe. I did actually say in the video that could be quite a tricky one, an awkward match, because if we remember rightly, Christiansen and Boe defeated Feng and Wang in the third round at the last World Championships, and so the fact they were facing that early, I just felt that history could repeat itself, and history did repeat itself. And I thought what added to that, there was one or two things. One thing that kind of added to that, and one thing that took away from that. The thing that added to it was Christiansen and Boe had won Macau Open, the Super 300, before this tournament. You know, their first tournament back, and were playing the kind of badminton that was of a higher level than before Christiansen's ban. So obviously he's been putting in some really hard training throughout his 18-month period off, and Boe obviously continued playing tournaments, so she kept her eye in. And I just felt that with the European crowd behind the Danes, and just the whole pressure situation, obviously Feng and Wang will be aware of the fact they lost them last time. I just thought that things were lining up for the same thing to happen again. The thing that went against it was obviously Feng Yanzhou in 2023 is different to Feng Yanzhou in 2025, and I felt that he's shown some signs, and he's played some tournaments, some big crunch tournaments like the Sudirman Cup and a few others, where he's kind of shown that he's got the ability to handle that pressure that little bit more. I think before the Worlds in 2023, as a pair, Feng and Wang had done really well, but at Super 1000s, they'd never even made a semi at that stage. And we all remember their loss in the Sudirman Cup at the 2023 in the semi-finals to Japan. So it was kind of primed for them to do that. And then, you know, these 2025 Worlds, they were looking a little bit stronger, but I still felt that that's actually the reason why I picked them, is because I felt that Feng Yanze has learnt from. He's basically got far more experience and has a better ability to be able to handle that sort of situation. But as it transpired, I don't think they lost because purely of pressure. I think a lot of it was to do. There was a little bit of that. I think some of their shot choices. I think both Feng and Wang were both equally guilty of playing nervously at times, which is understandable. But you know, everyone can get nervous at certain stages. But there was some definite. For me, I watched the majority of that game, and one thing that kept coming up to me was that, and actually this will actually link into the final a little bit later, is it wasn't quite as bad, but there was so many times where I felt that Feng Yanze would do these weird like shots up from below tape up through the centre, and Christiansen and Boe were just ready for them and were just able to kind of intercept those quite easily. The Danes had a really, really solid defence. Played with a lot of variation on their attack, so that would just unsettle the Chinese even more. And yeah, no, like I said, I think Wang Dongping couldn't win the net. If they tried to get Boe to the back of the court, she's strong from there as well, so the Danes didn't have too many glaring weaknesses and holes. Yeah, so anyway, Feng and Wang, they failed. They didn't give me a point there. Next one, so yeah, actually I'm looking at my mixed doubles here, didn't go particularly well. Tang Chunman and Saying Sweat, I thought they could be able to come through, and it looked like they were playing pretty well and looked like they were in good shape, but came up against a very well playing Capilla and Crasto on the day, and they thoroughly deserved. Again, I was coaching, I managed to watch, I think, majority of the first game. And I thought, oh, this could be quite tight. But then I was quite surprised to see that after the pair from Hong Kong had won the first game, the Indians won the next two quite comfortably. So yeah, I don't quite know what happened there. But obviously the crux of it is that Tang Chunman is Saying Sweat didn't come through that section. Next one was Dijapon and Supsara. And they also didn't get through, but a lot of people, when I made those predictions, kind of said, well, Ben, you've missed out that Wo and Chen, the All England champions, have a very good head-to-head against Dijapon, and that they would likely defeat them. But in the end, Dijapon and Supsara lost to Midorikawa and Saito, the Asia Championship runners-up. Obviously, another very good pair in that section and a potential banana skin. I did say when discussing Dijapon and Supsara that early rounds was where, like you could say this about most players, but when I've seen Dijapon and Supsara, if I've seen them get through to the quarters or the semis, generally speaking, that's where they play some of their best badminton. I think Supsara, I mentioned the All England where they lost to Siobhan and Gosen Watt, that I think early rounds the pressure could be a real factor, and obviously that proved correct here as Midorikawa and Saito, who are a very good pair, were able to defeat them. And then at the bottom, I finally got one right, and that was Zhang Sangbang and Wei Yaxin. They didn't have the smoothest run to the semis. They were definitely pushed a few times. I don't think they had a particularly great week, but they were able to still come through and get all the way to the final. So, and then my dark horse was Jafar Hidiatullah and Basaribu, who, yes, they lost, was it third round? I'm pretty sure it was third round. But the pair they lost to were the pair that ultimately won the whole thing, Chen Tangji and Toei Wei. So can't exactly say, and actually they were the only pair to take a game off the Malaysians as well. So although they weren't able to make it to the medal rounds or to prove my dark horse pick to be true, but they still played a fantastic tournament. I still think they're a very good pair for the future, and Indonesian mixed doubles is looking good with those two there. But obviously to come up against a pair on the kind of form that Chen and To are on is a bit unfortunate, but they were able to push them all the way. So mixed doubles, 1. That's terrible. Women's singles, I think I did a little better in this one. Unseong, she got through to the semi-finals. Again, I want to talk about her match in that semi-final a little later. I think someone asked me some questions on that, so I'll answer that then. Chen Yufei, she got through to semi-finals, so that's really, really good. She obviously did be taken to 3 by Mia Blichfeld, but I think once after that, I think that was the one match that then she kind of was almost a good thing that she lost that second game and was pushed to 3, because then from there she actually started to play better and better. My next pick was Yamaguchi. Yamaguchi won the whole thing, matching Marin's record. Like I said, I'll talk about the finals. I've done a few more notes on the finals, but for me, I said that she's been improving steadily. I've been seeing better and better form. I've noticed that a lot of the commentators saying the same thing. And yeah, I just felt that she could come through and be really, really strong for this tournament. I was not expecting her to win the whole thing, I must admit. But I think the draw opened up for a little bit. Obviously, she beat Han Yue, and then with Wang Ziyi, who was the second seed at the bottom, losing early on to Sindhu, and then Sindhu losing to Wadani. I think that kind of did help Yamaguchi, but I think even if she'd had the hardest draw you could possibly think of, the way she was playing, I think she still could have come out on top. She looked so much fitter. She looks a little bit lighter, a bit more athletic. But what was a real thing for me is that there were times where she'd be like pushed flat around the head and she would jump out and hit a smash. Now that sounds kind of like very simple, but when I saw her do that, I was like, she's in good shape. She's in good shape, and she's feeling confident, because those are kind of things where I know she's had issues with her back, so maybe that round head corner is always, if you've got a bad back, that round head corner is going to be a bit of a brutal area, but she just showed like she meant business, and the speed that she played at, and she was playing some fantastic attacking badminton and playing with great variety, confidence. All those signs that we saw when she won those back-to-back world titles that we haven't seen since. I know because she's been injured. For me, right from the first, I thought that she was loading up to have a really good tournament, but I wasn't expecting her level to be that much better at these World Championships, and it was absolutely brilliant. I couldn't be happier. As you all know, Yamaguchi is my favourite player, so her winning the whole thing had put a huge smile on my face. So yeah, no, Yamaguchi got through, and then the bottom I had Wang Ziyi, but she lost. She was the one player that didn't get through from my picks, as she was beaten by PV Sindhu, who played fantastic in that match. I think Wang Ziyi, like I was noticing actually in these early rounds, it did seem that like China were going to have a bit of a bad tournament, and it's funny to say that considering they had finalists in every single discipline. But you've got to consider that they had Li Shifeng went out early, Feng and Wang went out early, Liang Weikang and Yang Chang went out early. I might be missing one or two here as well. And then Wang Ziyi went out to Sindhu. It wasn't looking too good. And I think there was a lot of pressure. A lot of the Chinese players, even Shi Yuqi, just scraped through his matches. A number of the Chinese players weren't looking all too settled. I could say the same about Zhang Zhengbang and Wei Yaxin. They weren't. It was really, other than I'd say Chen Yufei and Lu Shengshu and Tan Ning. Other than those two, the Chinese team were looking very ropey, I'd say, in the early rounds. And Wang Ziyi, just for me in that match against Sindhu, wasn't able to expose Sindhu's weaknesses. So Sindhu's not obviously, she's getting a bit older, but she's taller. She's never been the most agile player. She's very strong and stuff. But if you can get the shuttle twisted and turned in front of her and then in behind her, there's definitely opportunities. And Wang Ziyi obviously is more than capable of being able to play that way, but she just wasn't able to do it in that match. And Sindhu played really, really well. She kind of attacked really well. And also, what I noticed was, I think I remember watching Sindhu play Tungjung in the India Open. I can't remember who was commentating, it might have been Steen, and he was saying stuff like, for Sindhu to get back to being competitive was something like she would need to develop a little bit more variety and quality from the front of the court. so that she could control rallies from there and obviously be able to avoid being pushed back deep or to twist and turn as much, and also to set up her great attack. And I have to admit, in that match against Wang Ziyi, I felt that she was actually doing some of that. Her front court looked a little bit less basic. There was definitely a bit of variety, so she was able to get Wang Ziyi a little bit late. And like I said, I mentioned the conditions. The conditions, if you were a little bit late on the shuttle, were very, very difficult. And so I just don't think Wang Ziyi was able to get Sindhu into those bad positions often enough. And then couple that, I think she was obviously very nervous and tight, brought on by Sindhu playing well as well. So, and I think that leads nicely on to my dark horse pick, which was Wardani, who did make the semi-finals. So that's one dark horse pick that actually made it through, and she defeated Sindhu. And it was a close game. It was a good game. And I think what ultimately decided was, it seemed like Wardani actually looked more of the experienced player at the end. She hit some big attacks, and Sindhu was the one that got a bit tense, and Wardani kind of freed up a little bit. Honestly, the way I was watching up to that point, I thought it might be the other way around, and thought we might be seeing Sindhu win her 6th world medal and getting back into the semis. But actually, it was Wardani who managed to turn it around. But what Wardani's very good at is she's very skillful, very sharp, and so was able to, especially we saw this in the first game, Sindhu did well to kind of turn it around. But we saw Sindhu having to really lurch forward at the front and then twist all the way into the back. So we started to see those weaknesses of her get exposed that little bit more. And there's something that Wang Ziyi just simply wasn't able to do enough of. So yeah, no. Women's singles, obviously Wang Ziyi no, but Wardani made up for it. So all my picks did actually make the semis. So that's a full house in that one as well. So that's all the disciplines. So women's doubles, the women's events I predicted 100%, really, because all of them, all of my picks, the main ones and dark horses all got to the semi-finals. Men's doubles was 50-50. Men's singles, I got three out of 4. Let's just call it out of 4. And mixed was the bad one. Only one. Yeah, that one didn't go too well. But the mixed doubles was probably one of the surprising ones in terms of who won. So I think what I'm going to do now is I might touch here on my notes. Here I've got we're going to talk about the finals. But I might touch obviously on some of the semi-finals as well. But I think most of those are going to come under some of the questions, especially the semi-finals that people kind of really want me to talk about. So let's start with the finals. I'm going to go in the order that the finals day was played in. So we're going to start off with the mixed doubles. So this was Chen Tangji and Tui Wei against Zhang Zhengbang and Wei Yaxin. This is actually one of the finals where I missed the opening game because I was actually in the gym. I thought I had enough time. I played badminton in the morning and I thought I had time to go to the gym. But I managed to catch the end of the first game, and obviously I watched all of the seconds. But from what I have watched back most of the first game, and it seems like a bit of a continuation. So for me, let's just talk about the pairs first. I've already spoken about Chen Zhengbang and Wei Yaxin. I said they weren't particularly great all the way up into this final. They managed to make it to the final, which I thought was really good. Obviously pressure, especially when they're the top seeds. Feng and Wang, the favourites, I guess you call it, fell away early, so I think a little bit of pressure fell on Zhang and Wei, a bit more than they would have liked to have got to the final and make up for that. Even though China did have another pair, the All England finalists that Zhang and Wei did defeat in the semis, but I think there's a little bit of pressure. I do think, in all honesty, this is something that the Chinese mixed doubles pairs don't have. If we go back the last few generations of mixed doubles in China, they've always had a pair that have been very, very consistent and always able to deliver. Zheng Siwen, Wang Yachong, Zhang Nan and Zhao Yunlei, etc. That if you go back, they've been around. We're looking over the last 10-15 years, they've always had at least one pair that just can deliver nine times out of 10, and mentally very, very strong. And I just think that is something that is lacking, and it's something that was on show in this final. But I'll talk about what actually happened, but I want to talk a little bit about the Malaysian pair, because I didn't pick them, even though they were the 4th seeds, as one of my picks, because of obviously what had been going on with them. They had a brilliant World Tour finals at the end of last year, almost upsetted Zheng and Wang's last dance. But then they had a bit of a tricky start to the year. Then there was obviously all the news came out that they were not getting along, or that whenever either of them made mistakes, it seemed to blow up into proportion. They were clashing personalities. Obviously, this ultimately ended up with them splitting as a pair, having odd tournaments with a few others that didn't work, and then they came back. But then I was hearing reports from Rexy Meineke, director of Malaysian sport, that they were still not there together. There was still some question marks or some doubts. It was mainly around like if one of them made a mistake, how the other one handled it, and I was like, oh, okay. If you combine everything, they hadn't reached a final this year, I don't think, or they'd had a period away. It seemed all the reports that were saying that they weren't getting along. I just was like, there's no way that these two, as much as I really like them and as much as I know what they're capable of, it was enough doubt for me to not pick them. But my God, this whole tournament, absolutely brilliant. I kept waiting. Whether it was in the semi-finals, the quarterfinals, and the final, every one of my notes started with, if things get close, if pressure's there, or a few mistakes might happen by either Toi Wei or Chen Tenji, I kept thinking, is there going to be that one mistake at one crucial time that is going to spark everything that we'd heard of before? And maybe that would be their crumbling point. But no, it never happened. I did see some weird mistakes, especially I'd say Chen Tenji made a few more. But then again, I talked about the conditions. Actually, I'll talk about those. How many times do we see players like miss hit from the back of the court? Because of that drift or that downwards drift that Antonsen spoke of. There was a question, I'll get to that later. But I saw Chen Tenji, especially from that far end as you look down, make a few of those. Like some crucial times, both in the semis against Jokel and Del Rue, and also in the final. And they were like, I was like, oh, here we go, this is it. It's gonna happen. And no. I was like, no. Then the next point, Chen Tenji would come back and play absolutely brilliantly. The way that they kind of handled it, they looked so much more like a unit throughout this whole tournament. If I'd watched them play these World Championships first, and then you told me what had gone on beforehand, I simply wouldn't have believed you. They were like a completely different pair, and they showed what they're capable of, what everyone was praising them for at those World Tour finals, what I praised them for. Incredible attack, really, really fast, physical. Toi Wei's skills from the front, she does remind me, I must admit, of Lian Natsir, which funnily enough was their coach's former partner, Nova Widianto, being behind the court. And when she's on it, she can play brilliantly. And I do think she was the star of the show throughout the whole tournament, especially the semis and the finals, because they were big games. Okay, so semi-final up against the French pair. They had the huge crowd support on their hands. The crowd were loud. Whenever the Malaysians won, it was quiet. Whenever the French pair won a point, it was really, really loud. But the French pair, they got themselves into it at times, maybe in the first, but the Malaysians led both games all the way through. They handled that situation brilliantly, and I did think that it would be a battle for the net, who can control it, because when the French are really good, they're able to play those, Del Rue's able to play those soft pushes through, those kind of like mid-court pushes, and then obviously Jokel's able to push up and really make his presence known in the mid-court, but they were rarely able to get into that. And for a big part of that was, I think, two factors. One was that I think the French pair, I think they got a little bit too excited and were hitting a little bit too hard too often. I think the occasion got to them. But also, in all honesty, the Malaysians' brilliance, especially Toi Wei, her control of the front court, just the French were having to hit up a lot. And the same in the final. I thought head-to-heads, recent form, ranking, all pointed to the Chinese winning that final. But I thought, in all honesty, it's a world final. We can throw all that out. It's going to come down to who can handle the pressure and the battle of the two ladies. And the Malaysians won both those battles. They were able to handle the pressure so much more. The Chinese in the final were just all over the place. They looked their shot quality was pretty poor. They were constantly hitting from below the tape. And Toi Wei absolutely took Wei Yaoxin out of the game. She was absolutely brilliant. For me, okay, so there's two other main things. One is, I spoke about this in a Beckman's breakdown before, but I talked about the Chinese pair. And that is that I do feel that the service situation is their weakest area. Because they're so classical front back, because in all honesty, Wei Yaxin has got one of the worst overhead actions I have ever seen. It's really, really surprising. She just can't play the rear court very well at all. It looks odd, and if she's able to be pushed back there and kept there, it leaves massive holes. And Zhang Zhengbang is not a mixed player. He's not a front court player at all. There are some mixed players, say like for example Kim Won-ho or Seo Sun-jae, when they played mixed, who were very good and were able to hold the front court incredibly well. And even others that aren't naturally good there, like even Zheng Siwei, Yuta Watanabe, etc. They can play the front court very, very well. Maybe because they've got a little bit more men's doubles experience, but Zhang Zhengbang is not very good from the front. So if you're able to get them into that situation, then there are definitely opportunities. And I think, like I said about the service situation, when they're returning, it's quite easy to, if Zhang's returning, to low him and then quickly lift it over to Wei Yaxin, or what we saw countless times was flicking Wei Yaxin, and the Malaysians did it absolutely perfectly. But what was quite funny to me, or surprising, was that how the Chinese didn't try to counter it at all. But in general, I think the Malaysians, like they did against the French, they got them to playing it from below the tape. And this Chinese pair, in all honesty, they're very, very strong when you have Wei at the back, Wei at the front, and Jiang at the back, and they're hitting above the tape. But where they need to get a bit better is they need to figure out solutions when someone's able to get Wei Yaxin to the back more. Personally, if I was her, I'd have just cross-cleared it and almost restarted the rally. That's how I would have done it. Or even a straight clear, because Wei Yaxin's defense is arguably a little bit stronger than Zhang's at times. But I think they need to work on their quality from below tape. And I think Zhang Zhengbang could also do with improving his front court a little bit. But like I said, the Malaysians played that tactic over and over again. They did it from the service situation all the time, but even in open play, they were able to expose those weaknesses of the Chinese pair, and thoroughly well deserved. It's absolutely fantastic. Obviously, this is Malaysia's second world title after Aaron Chan So Yik won in 2022. So it's a monumentous moment. And actually, I think what makes it even more, obviously this was Malaysia's first finalist in the mixed doubles. But beyond that, I was actually looking it up. This is the first time Malaysia have beaten the Chinese opponents in a world final. Now, obviously that makes sense because Malaysia have only won 2 world titles, but the majority of their pairs and players in the past that have got to finals have usually come up against Chinese opposition. The Sidex against Leon Bo and Tian Bingyi. I know in the mid-90s, Chae Sun-kit and Yap Hock lost to Budiarto and Wijaya. That was an Indonesian pair. But then you had Wong Chun Han lost to Zhaz Wanze. Last time the Worlds were in Paris, you had Ku and Tan lose to Kai Yun and Fu Weifeng. Obviously Lee Chongwei losing numerous times to both Lin Dan and Chen Long. And is there any others that I'm missing? But yeah, no, majority of times when they're playing Chinese opposition, they lost. The fact that they were able to beat a Chinese pair, to do so in mixed doubles, where, let's be honest, China are seen as the top team, pretty incredible. So yeah, Steen said it was a tactical masterpiece, and I would agree. But for me, the star of the Malaysian pair, other than their unity, matching hair again, clearly the yin yang didn't work, but was Toi Wei. She was absolutely masterful. She played brilliant mixed doubles and all week long. It wasn't just the final or the semi, it was all week long. So really good. Next one, women's singles. So this final proved to be a little bit disappointing, and that's mainly because obviously Chen Yufei's ankle injury. So in her semi-final against An Si-young at 5-3 in the second, having won the first, she rolled her ankle terribly. Like, it literally rolled over on itself. Horrible injury. And while she was able to continue and play on in that match, obviously there was question marks as to whether she'd be able to play injury or pain-free in the final. And I think I've heard reports since that she maxed out on painkillers. You could see the taping on it. And even then, even when she was playing, you could see those old times where she was hobbling. So it's a real shame because it could have been an absolutely fantastic final, because they were the 2 best players this week. Yamaguchi, again, before this final kicked off, I kind of thought that, Chen Yufei's ankle was going to be a big factor. But then I thought, well, what if it isn't? What if they've managed to treat it, or it wasn't as bad as it looked, or whatever, by a miracle, Chen Yufei is fully fit. I did think that actually Yamaguchi still had a good chance. And the reason I say that is because in the semi-final, in Chen Yufei's semi-final, what An Se-young just simply didn't do was attack enough or to apply pressure. She was just, for me, it looked like An Se-young was just feeding Chen Yufei. I don't know whether there was something wrong with An Se-young, maybe it was pressure. It did look a little bit like, I don't know, the situation or it was the conditions where she was finding too difficult. It wasn't like she was making mistakes, but she just wasn't really doing anything. Like, sometimes she wasn't able to penetrate Chen Yufei's defense, or even if she attacked it and got kind of like above the tape, it would just be like some simple block. It wasn't even like, say it was like not just this, it was just this. It wasn't like even like this, like a little bit more of a deception or a sharp cross. She just wasn't really doing anything with the shuttle, whereas Chen Yufei's attack was in general a lot sharper. I know An Se-young's attack is not her best weapon. Her shot quality, consistency, and ability to just kind of keep going and going and going, and her like line and length is what her mainly does work for her. But she just wasn't able to do that. Even when Chen Yufei didn't roll her ankle at 5-3, so it was obviously 6-3. I think An Se-young won the next point, but then after that, she completely let Chen Yufei back in. It was a very odd performance by An Se-young, but the point I'm trying to make is that the way that Yamaguchi was playing all week, really, really fast, like incredibly fast, by far the fastest player on court at the whole tournament in women's singles. But she was playing confident, she was playing attacking, variety, absolutely, like she has amazing stuff. I'm not singing her praises because Yamaguchi's my favourite player, but so I thought the way that she was playing is the way that I thought An Se-young in her own way could have played and could have put more pressure on Chen Yufei, and that could have resulted in that's what I thought would be the key to defeating Chen Yufei in this tournament. I also thought one specific shot is Chen Yufei's, most players in singles are slow to the tight forehand corner, especially from like drop shots. Most players are slow there, but I do think that when I've watched Chen Yufei against, say, Yamaguchi or An Se-young in the past, that area has definitely been exposed. And the player that can hit that shot there the best is Yamaguchi. Her like forehand cross drop, it comes down so tight, like it's almost like dropping on the net. And so I think Yamaguchi not only was playing the attacking game that I think was going to be key to defeating Chen Yufei, but she had the shots that I think Chen Yufei doesn't particularly like playing against. And all of this came true in the final, but obviously it was all exacerbated by the fact that Chen Yufei's ankle was not 100%. You could see it hobbling. You could see sometimes when she'd like lunge and then like you'd want to step through, but then you'd see her hop, and obviously after the game you could see that she was in quite a lot of discomfort. The start of the second game she really did try to go for it, and I think Yamaguchi did really well. She weathered that storm, and kind of obviously again there came a point where Chen Yufei was like, this is just not my day. I've tried everything. I'm trying to attack her, I'm trying to do this, trying to do that, but I can't move well enough. Yamaguchi's too consistent, she's playing with too much variety, she's playing 3 speeds above me, she's hitting these shots that I don't like, and it looks like she's not going to stop. She's not like she's going to run out of, she's not going to fatigue. And so yeah, honestly, best Yamaguchi at this tournament I've seen, possibly ever. I said when she won her world titles that she won them because she added really nice attacking elements to her game. And she did that again here. And not only that, but she looked to be the fittest Yamaguchi. She looks that little bit slimmer. She's never been fat, but she's always looked like someone, she's a bit podge. Bit like, like baby fat in a way, but she looked like she's lost some of that, and absolutely brilliant. And I wonder where she's going to take this level from here. If she can stay injury free, because that's always been Yamaguchi's issue, is that sometimes she has these really good periods, but then like that back injury or another injury comes up, and it's just something that kind of as always, kind of knocked her a little bit. So hopefully she doesn't. And I also want to just take this moment to, I hope the injury for Chen Yufei isn't anything too serious. That I think I've heard it is just a sprain, so no ligament damage or all that kind of stuff. So hopefully it's just a little bit of rest, a little bit of recuperation, let the swelling come down, just let everything settle, and then hopefully back, because she's been playing brilliant as well. You know, fantastic tournament from both those players. Just a real shame that obviously it ended that way for Chen Yufei. Right, moving on. The women's doubles. Wow. What a match this one was. Absolutely fantastic. There's lots I could talk about, because my notes here, because the match was obviously 3 games and there were some swings and stuff in momentum. But, you know, for me, the question marks before this were going to be, how does both pairs handle their own pressure, their own expectations? I must admit, going into this final, actually no, sorry, I'll just backtrack there. Obviously for the Chinese pair, they are the world number ones. They are the pair that China are really looking to win these major tournaments in, you know, probably for this Olympic cycle and possibly the one after as well. They're looking at them as the next Chen and Jiang, and that's quite a mantle to take over. And so obviously this is their first chance to win a world title. And so there's a lot of pressure on their shoulders to deliver. And for the Malaysians, I think there was slightly less pressure in terms of the final, because obviously in the semi-final they beat Matsuyama and Shida, a pair that had been a bit of a difficult pair for them. So I think the fact they got through that, you could see the emotions after they won that was, you know, very, very high. They were able to now compete in a world final, so maybe some of the pressure is off. But then they're probably going to think, but we've got a good chance, you know, like anything can happen. And I think what buoyed that was the fact that obviously they just saw their teammates Chen and To win very comfortably early against a Chinese pair. And also, I think what added to that was for Lu and Tan. I remember saying this to my wife before this final started, was it's been really interesting how they handle it, because not only is the pressure, all the pressures that I've just said, but Team China haven't had the best start to the day. They've lost the first 2 finals. They're the top seeds. China now looking at them to not just deliver overall, but to put their finals day back on track. That's quite a lot of pressure to take, quite a lot of pressure to handle. And so, yeah, it really created a nice, a really interesting dynamic in that respect. For me, I think the key, when it came to this match, the key was going to be how easily the Malaysians can win their points, how well they can link up and they can rotate, because I think that is something where fast, speedy pairs that can kind of counter on defence and rotate and get the front court player involved is possibly something that is an area that Lu Shengxu and Tan Ning aren't as good at. You know, they're a very, very good pair. There aren't many weaknesses, but, you know, you have to kind of find little chinks that maybe you can work at to kind of break down the bigger armour that is them. And I think one of them is that. I did think that, to begin with, in the opening stages, the Malaysians were playing too fast ones. They needed to try to play some softer counter defense into the gaps, where then, you know, for example, Tina could defend it soft, or I'm not saying like a soft block that drops super tight, but just like one that reaches the Chinese with not too much speed, that then she can move in and the counter and get into the attacking formation and be able to put pressure. And obviously kind of, again, Lu Shengxu and Tan Ning, they're not the best rotative pair. They tend to be much more like static. Obviously they can rotate, you know, you don't become 1-on-1s without it, but they're not like a Matsuyama Shida or Pearly and Tina, where they can kind of go around each other like this. So I think there is, because they're much more set, there are gaps that you can expose a little bit more. But I think at the start, Pearly and Tina were just kind of like hitting it back. Their attack was a little bit one-dimensional, so the Chinese could sit back and defend, and so it wasn't working. But then it was when they were, obviously, Malaysians were able to turn it around a little bit and were starting to do that. And it's something that Steen mentioned, that I think the focus then shifted to be that when they go from that defensive situation, when they're able to kind of maybe push into a gap and move forward, that in that transition phase they needed to maintain their focus, because the Chinese can hit with very, very good quality, and if they're not ready for it, they might miss an opportunity, and if the rallies go on and on and on like that, then it just I think, again, the favour turns towards the Chinese. Another area that obviously was highlighted and was that they needed to try to, the Malaysians, this is, needed to try to expose Tan Ning a little bit. I think she's a player that can sometimes get a little bit more nervous in the partnership of Lu Shengshu and Tan Ning, but she's a very good player, but Lu Shengshu is the better player, is the one that can make more of a difference in a rally. She's the one that can do more things from more areas of the court, especially the front, especially in defence. So I think because Lu Shengshu is more of a front court player, and Tan Ning isn't as good moving, again, that leads back into that defence situation, is you can't just blast through because Lu Shengshu will just lap it up. Can you move it out of the way, or can you actually move Tan Ning and more side to side, etc, etc. So yeah, as this match went into the second game, it would be quite easy for me to sit here and just say that Pearly and Tina were able to suddenly do all the things right, and that was how they were able to send this game into a decider and how the game ended up being quite close. But that wouldn't quite be the full picture. That wouldn't be quite true. Obviously the Malaysians were able to do some of the things I said. They were able to kind of push in off defense and then move in to counter. They were able to kind of find some gaps on the Chinese side. They were able to link up a little better and all those kind of things. But I think really what this match boiled down to, I think it's two or three things. One was going to be how consistently both pairs could implement the right tactics, the right game, the kind of game that they wanted to play and the game that was good to win. And when it comes to that one, I think the Chinese, I'm not just saying that because they won, but I think they actually did do that. For example, I don't think Pearly and Tina, like I said, would do the soft pushes or the counter or the linking up play really well, but then they wouldn't do it enough, or the variation in attack, but then there'd be too many rallies where they're just being sent onto the, they're just sending the same sort of smashes, the same sort of attacks. It's lacking that variety, or they get caught into defense and they'd end up just lifting it up rather than trying to kind of move the defense and mix it with the pushes, mix it with the soft stuff, etc, etc. And another one was that there was a call similar to the mixed doubles with the flick serve. I think the Malaysians flicked a few times to Tan Ning or to Lu Shengshu, I can't remember which, but to get them out on the court to then send them the other way, and it worked really well. But then they didn't do it enough. They kind of deviated from their plan a little bit too often. You could hear that in Steve Pedersen's commentary a couple of times. He would say like no, because the Malaysians would win one or two rallies doing all the right stuff, and then they'd kind of deviate. So they'd be attacking at Tan Ning, moving her around, and then they'd send too many towards Lu Shengshu, who's far more creative. And they would sometimes win those rallies, of course, but ultimately they couldn't do that. And in the long run, it was always going to end up on the Chinese side. I think the other thing was going to be who held their nerve, who could make the fewer mistakes. Both pairs had patches where they were incredibly nervous. Tan Ning almost looked exhausted, I think, based off of nerves. And whilst the Malaysians looked smiley and happy on the outside, I think on the inside they missed a couple of sitters. There was also luck involved. There was that rally where Lu Shengshu and Tan Ning saved two defensive shots from round the back and won the point. There was another one where they were both out the court, and I think Pearly Tan put it wide, and all this kind of stuff. And I think those kind of factors were ultimately the deciding factor. I think the Malaysians weren't able to stick to their tactics that was showing that they were working enough. I think the Chinese were able to get on the attack more in the third game especially, and were able to attack very well. I think they controlled their nerves and the situation a little better. They had a little bit of luck on their side. And yeah, those are the little things. Like I said, when it comes to these major finals, or finals in general, badminton at this level, it usually comes down to the smallest of margins. But when it really matters, at some crunch points to the start of the third game, or then when it got a little bit tighter, the Malaysians looked like they might be coming back. It was the Chinese that were just that little bit more solid, a bit more willing to play the more aggressive, the not riskier, but the more proactive shots, and they really took it to their Malaysian opponents. And I think with that, that's why they won and deserved winners. But it was a really, really fantastic final to watch. It really shows for me women's doubles. I think it's been this way for a little while, but women's doubles was always one of those disciplines where people might leave the stadium or they might watch something else and come back when it's finished. You know, the old joke, oh, we'll watch a film in an hour and a half, the women's doubles will be done, we can watch the next one. I don't think no one's really wanting to skip the women's doubles matches now. They are really, really entertaining, and this final was a perfect example of that. And the next final was the men's singles between Shi Yuqi of China and Kunlavut, a really interesting and intriguing match that has a bit of a story behind it, and that story being that 1 year previous, in the same arena, the Alias Arena, at the Olympic Games in the quarterfinals, Kunlavut upset Shi Yuqi, who was the #1 seed at that tournament as well, and obviously Kunlavut went on to go reach the final, and it was a result that was absolutely devastating and heartbreaking for Shi Yuqi. Not just the fact that he lost in the quarterfinals, but it was more the manner in which he lost, where he was completely crippled with nerves, couldn't play anywhere near his best level, and it was a result that left him, like I said, devastated and almost retiring from badminton. He did seriously consider it because he really struggled for a good couple of months after the Olympic Games. But obviously, as you know, he didn't do that. He continued on, managed to really refine his form, has won some major titles, and this year has reached the final of won 3 out of the 4 Super 1000 events. And that's even when you consider that at the beginning of this year, I heard that he actually suffered quite a bad illness that caused him to lose a lot of weight. So quite a remarkable story for Shi Yuqi, and obviously it's come full circle. It did come full circle at these World Championships, because in the final he was to face the same player, Kunlavut, and so I think many people had the question mark of whether the same thing would happen. Would Shi Yuqi crumble again under the pressure of facing Kunlavut in such a big match? I think what added to that was 2 things. One was that Shi Yuqi has not won a major title before. He's obviously won the All England, and he's won, like I said, a number of the Super 1000s, but when it comes to, say, the World Championships, Asian Games, or the Olympic Games, he has failed to win. The closest he came was in the World Championships in 2018 when he got the silver medal, losing to Kento Momota. So obviously the fact that he was so desperately wanting to win this title, could that, combined with the fact he's playing the same player that he wasn't able to raise his game against in the Olympics, would the same thing happen? The other thing that added to that, and it was certainly something that was a little bit more pressing on people's minds, was that Shi Yuqi's route to the final was far from smooth. Most notably his 3rd round win over Christo Popov. Incredibly close match where he really had the crowd against him, and Christo was playing some truly inspired badminton. He managed to scrape through that match, but then it was in the semi-final where he played against Victor Lai of Canada, a guy ranked 50 in the world, the real surprise of this tournament. And in that semi-final, Shi Yuqi had to save 2 match points. Now, obviously, he did manage to come through both those games, but it was the manner in which he played. So it was showing great character that he was able to get through those matches. But the fact that he was so nervous and so tense and so uptight and clearly riddled with nerves, combine that with the fact that everyone knew how desperate he was to win a major title because he hadn't won one, and also add to that the player that he had to play was the one that truly capitalized on those nerves at the Olympics the year before. I think another thing that added to that, to kind of shift the attention a little bit to Kunlavut, was that Kunlavut was playing some absolutely amazing badminton throughout this week, especially his semi-final against Anders Antonsen. He was in a really good playing mood. He is one of the most, if not the most technically gifted players. Possibly lacks a little bit on the physical side, but it's not like his physical is terrible. But the way that he'd been playing, he was definitely going to make things difficult. And if Shi Yuqi was a little bit heavy in the legs through nerves, or not able to hit his attacking winners, which is definitely something that that is a good tactic to use against Kunlavut, then it was all in all was pointing towards this could be another Kunlavut victory, and Kunlavut could retain his world title. So yeah, there was all those question marks against him, and he came out absolutely firing in this final, flying, attacking brilliantly. The round the head cross court smash that he does, that's something that he's had in his weaponry since I remember first seeing him win his first All England many years ago, was on full display, and Steen and Jill were like, we didn't see any of that in the semi-final. So that was a good sign if you were a Shi fan, that he was playing a little bit freer. Maybe the fact that regardless of who he's playing or the situation he's in, just playing against someone that maybe he saw that he wasn't the favourite, allowed him to relax that little bit. But whatever it was, he came out absolutely flying at the start of this game, and took charge, and was in charge until 18-11 up in the first game. And then suddenly we saw something interesting happened. Shi started to just make lots of mistakes, leave things on the back line. He looked completely flustered and let Victor completely into the game. There was even a point where Shi was doing this to his coaches, almost like they must have been trying to maybe give him encouragement or say something tactically, and he was like almost like just didn't want them to say anything. I think it was at a moment where he could sense that things were going away from him, and he probably just wanted to be in his own thoughts. We saw Anders Antonsen do the same thing, I think, in his quarterfinal against Chen, and I think Shi was trying to do the same. But regardless, that game ended up going away from him. Shi losing it 21-19. Complete turnaround, and it really did seem at that point that, all those question marks, all that thing I just told you about was all coming to the forefront, and it did really seem, when I was watching it, that Kunlavut could run away with this. And I'll be honest, the first 2 points of the second game, it looked like that really was going to be the case, as Kunlavut went 2-love up, playing really attacking. He almost looked like, okay, he sensed this is his opportunity. If he can really kind of continue this forward and put maximum pressure on Shi, then he can then get a big lead at the start, and it's pretty much going to be almost impossible for Shi to come back. However, 2-love up, Shi then won 3 points that, in all honesty, he probably shouldn't have won. They were like those kind of points where you're just hanging on by a thread, and you might, I think there was one where he kind of hit it really late on the back line, but it just dropped, and then Kunlavut hit it out, and there was 1 or 2 like that, which gave Shi the lead 3-2, and then Shi backed it up with 3 good points. Suddenly it's 6-2, and it was those 6 points at the beginning of that second game that I think kind of changed it, kind of stopped Kunlavut's momentum, puts the ball back into Shi's court, and obviously he was able to carry that forward and actually win the second game very comfortably. I think after a certain point, Kunlavut kind of gave the game away, kind of knew that he was like, okay, I'm not going to win this one, let's save my energy for the third, which is obviously, an understandable tactic, although, in all honesty, from that end, Kunlavut knew that he was going to have to finish the game that way, and the writing was on the wall a little bit, because Kunlavut, it wasn't that he was losing from that end, but he was also struggling to win points. Apart from those 2 at the start, I said, he didn't win many points from that end, so it wasn't boding too well for the third game. And talking of the third game, again, Shi obviously had the momentum, a little bit like Kunlavut did at the end of the first. Shi had that at the end of the second, and it spilt over into the beginning of the third. 3-1, I think, Shi went up very, very quickly. But then we had another period of suddenly Shi hitting lots of cheap points, hitting out quick points, and I think Kunlavut went 8-3 up. And then I was like, oh no, okay. Again, watching this, there was so many ups and downs, swings around, but they were really extreme swings, especially from Shi's side. Like, it goes from playing absolutely brilliantly flawless badminton to giving the game away. But then 8-3 hits, and Shi suddenly turns into a different beast again. Like, stops making those errors and starts attacking with huge variety and just winning lots and lots of points, and went up. I think he went into the break 11-9 up. Like, you see the swings and roundabouts, and there, 11-9 heading into the second interval, the second half, I had to admit that it was like, okay, Shi's going to win this, because he's now going to the side that he was so dominant from before, and the side that Kunlavut had struggled to win points from. And as the match was getting longer, obviously we're into the third end, the second half of the third end, there were some signs as well that Kunlavut was a little tired. His timing was off on certain shots. Some of his movement looked a little laboured. He wasn't getting up as much to certain shots or coming forward with that as much vigour. And I think also Xu Qi's defence, I think he had confidence going into that the final half on that side, knowing how the second game had gone. That gave him that boost. And it seemed to be like, again, the match was going away from Kunlavut and it was in Xu Qi's favour, and it really did feel like, okay, Xu Qi's going to win this. This is the final bit. But there was one more twist and tale, and that was that I can distinctly remember, I can't remember the score, maybe 14, 15, 9 to Xu Qi or something like that. And I think Steen Pedersen said something along the lines of, the only way Kunlavut's going to win this is he's going to have to play super tight net and then almost jump smash at the back of the court. An incredibly hard and physically taxing style, but that's the only way. And then he said, I don't think Kunlavut's got the legs or the ability to do that. And whilst Kunlavut didn't, he did suddenly have a little bit of a burst, and he was working incredibly hard, which I have to give him a lot of credit for, because when he played in the Olympic final and things weren't quite working against Victor Axelsen, he did roll over a little bit. Maybe he was just happy that he'd won. He got a silver at the Olympics, and he was content with that. In this final, he stuck in there and he fought really, really hard, and he was able to get a few points back. And then there were periods where he got within like 2 or 3, and Xu Qi maybe made 1 or 2 cheap points alongside that. However, whenever he got within 2 or 3, I'm going to flip it back to being positive about Xu Qi again, there would be a long rally, really long and hard rally, and Xu Qi, I think out of the 3 or 4 of those long rallies, he came out on top out of, like, if not all of them, 3 out of the 4. So I think, I think there was a point at 18-16 or 17-14 or 17-15 where had Kunlavut won it and had gone within 1 point, I actually think had Kunlavut won those points, maybe Xu Qi would have gifted a few more, and the pressure would have been, I think he could have felt it. But the fact that he managed to win those points didn't just give him that breathing space, but almost kind of like made him, no, I can do this, I can win this. And that pattern kind of followed towards the end, and ultimately in the end Xu Qi came out on top. So it was a match that had a hell of a lot of swings and roundabouts in it. There were moments for Xu Qi where he was playing absolutely unplayable badminton, and then moments where he would just play like he was riddled with nerves and just couldn't keep the shuttle in. And I think Kunlavut, I'm going to talk a little bit later in the video about what I think Kunlavut can improve upon, but again, I think with him, he's so skillful and so technically gifted, but I think physically, not that he was crazy tired in that match, but I think he did drop a little bit, and I think if he could get physically a little better, he might have been able to win those long rallies, or he would be able to have been able to play at a slightly higher pace and maybe taken advantage of some of the great shots that he was doing. But all credit to Xu Qi. After the route that he'd had in this final, after the journey he's had since the Olympics last year, to cap it off with a world win, you could see how much it meant to him at the end. He was in tears, and he's someone that doesn't show too much emotion, but he showed a lot of emotion after this final, and rightfully so. It's one of those things that you have to tell a story about. Maybe I will do that in a video at some point in the future, but it was a really, really incredible final. I think it will be remembered as a good final. I think if we relook at it from a critical standpoint, there were definite moments that weren't good. I talked about Xu Qi gifting loads of points, or Kunlavut giving in that second game, or not capitalising. But there were some rallies within that where both players, especially towards the end of the third, those big long rallies when Kunlavut looked like he was really starting to come back as Xu Qi, where both players were playing their best badminton at the same time, and it was absolutely ridiculous to watch and really, really insane. It added to that just the whole story behind it just added to that. That was the one final, I must admit, watching it, where it had my heart really racing, like truly, truly racing, and that's the sign of a match that has you. So, no, congratulations to Xu Qi, fantastic win, fully well deserved. And the last final, the men's doubles, between the top seeds, Kim Won-ho, Seo Seung-jae, and Chen Boyang and Liu Yi of China. Kind of a surprise entrant to the final. Although, say surprising, let's not forget at the start of this year, the Malaysia Open Super 1000, they did reach the final there. And actually, funnily enough, in my Beckman's breakdown from that, I did make the comment that I wasn't quite sure where this pair would go. I said they didn't look like anything extraordinary, didn't have anything crazy special. I thought, they could easily push on and be one of China's top pairs, or that Malaysia Open might be their best ever result. Clearly, I would still say the verdict's out on that first one, but clearly the Malaysia Open 1000 wasn't their only best result, because they've just gone and reached the world final. So for me, again, question marks that I had before this match. I didn't have much about the Chinese. I hadn't really seen much of them in this tournament. I had watched a lot of Kim Won-ho and Seo Jae though. Obviously, based on how the Koreans played in the semi-final, where they absolutely took apart the Danes, I was thinking, obviously, can they continue that? Can they continue that form forward? But then I also had one eye remembering their other match against Man and T, where they were pushed really, really hard. And I thought, well, the Chinese pair, being Chinese, they're going to be fast, they're going to be attacking, they're going to be powerful. And those are the kind of things that sometimes, if they come out absolutely guns blazing, the Koreans can be a little bit susceptible to. So I thought, add to that a little bit of pressure, obviously being the top seeds and expected to win. Obviously, they beat the Chinese pair in that Super 1000 final. That maybe that might get to them a little bit. But then I was thinking, Seo Jae so experienced, and Kim Won-ho's experienced too. That maybe that's a factor. This Chinese pair, this would be by far their biggest final. Whereas obviously the Koreans have far more experience. There was so many little question marks here. But as the match started, it seemed like the one about the Chinese being that little bit more, having the firepower and the speed to kind of make it difficult for the Koreans was kind of proving true. They came out firing on all cylinders. They were playing like a typical Chinese pair. Anything that goes up is hit down. Defense is always fast and flat, and everything's played out 100 miles an hour. And I think to begin with, Kim Won-ho and Seo Jae got wrapped up in that a little bit. I think they kind of got caught into the speed and were playing the Chinese players' game. And all I was thinking was, if the Koreans can take some of the speed out, play some of what they're so good at, of playing the gaps, or using both of them, as we know, were both very successful mixed players. Seo Jae was a world champion in mixed doubles. Kim Won-ho is an Olympic finalist in mixed doubles, where they can play into the mid-court, they can play the little pushes. Even when they're slightly below tape, they can still play those quality shots. So the Chinese, by the time they're hitting it, is coming with not much speed, which is, I think, where some Chinese pairs aren't as good. I think they're very good when they're like matching speed with speed, but when there's not much, or there's a variety of pace coming at them, they're not quite as good. And I definitely think that's the case with this Chinese pair, because they're a little bit more direct. They're not like an overly skillful or creative player. And I think as soon as the Koreans were able to start to do that, I think part of that was they settled in. This final became rather one-sided, I must admit. For me, what's really good, because one thing I want to say about the Koreans, though, I think the man of the match, in fact, the man of the tournament for this pair, was Kim Won-ho. I know that in the past, some people I've seen have kind of criticised Kim Won-ho, saying that when it comes to like really, really tight and clutch moments, that Kam In-hyuk, Seo Jae's former partner, was better. And I was like, didn't quite see it. Yeah, so Kim Won-ho had some odd times where he had some bad games, but I felt Seo Jae was the same, and in general, Kim Won-ho was like a man with ice in his veins. And he proved me true in this tournament, especially in the final. He was the one that Seo Jae started off a little bit, I don't know what it was, nerves, tension, whatever, but making some mistakes. He wasn't playing particularly well. In fact, I think all week Seo Jae never really got firing all the cylinders, which is a scary prospect considering I still think he played quite well. But for me, it was Kim Won-ho that steadied the ship in this partnership, that led it. His movement forward, his front court, absolutely insane. His defence was really, really solid throughout majority of the tournament, and his ability, like I said, to just move in and play that front court, absolutely ridiculous. He is, I think at the moment he is the best front court player in the world. If he's above the tape and he's hit down fast, rarely do they lose those points there. And then I think that rubbed off on Serson J, because as this final went on, a little bit like in the semi-final, Serson J started to kind of find his feet, started to find his range, started to kind of calm down and use his skills that we've seen him in the mixed doubles, finding the gaps, the little soft pushes, combined with the fast stuff. They can do the fast stuff really well. But for me, there were so many times where the Chinese would block it down into the service line area, the front one, and the Koreans would be way below the tape. But they were able to kind of push it still into the mid-court with quality. You could say the Chinese should have maybe not step up on some of those, but then they would go over the top, or they would absolutely. It started to become it was just such a fantastic show of men's doubles, and I think they were, deserved, very well deserved world champions, and they've kind of finally, I think, put to bed the curse of the world number ones when it comes to the men's doubles. I think over the last year or two, any pair that's become world number ones has kind of been hit by a run of bad form, and obviously you can't say that about the Koreans. They've just become world champions as world number ones. So yeah, though, for me, man of the tournament for that pair, a little bit like I said about Toi Wei in the mixed doubles, for me it was Kim Won-ho. And actually now I'm thinking back to their quarterfinal against Man and T, I can distinctly remember where in the third game it was Kim Won-ho that did a return of serve where he came like that and he actually hit it up over into the backcourt, and it completely threw the Malaysians. And from then on, that match, that it was like that one return of serve just changed. That's what basically changed the match. It's funny how little things like that can happen. That just reminded me again. That was Kim Won-ho that did it, and in that final, I think he was the one that got Serson J back under control. And once Serson J was calm playing well, once they're both in that zone, they are so hard to beat. So hard to beat. So what I think it was they were 13-17 down the first game, and then they won 16 straight points to go win that game and we'll go 8-love up. Just absolutely fantastic. I really have nothing much more else to say about them than, again, like all the champions, thoroughly well deserved. And they were one of the, other than their match against Man T where they had that one match, they were absolutely sublime from start to finish in this tournament. So Q&A, the last section. So let's move on to those questions. So first one, with Yamaguchi's 3 World Championship titles, winning 3 of the last 4 World Championship events, does it mean the women's singles category GOAT debate remains open rather than a closed case? For me, the women's singles GOAT debate, there's never been a closed case. It's always been open. There's a number of players that if you go, GOAT debate is always difficult because do you go off like records and achievements, but then you've got different eras, you've got to have the impact on the game. I think in some respects there's got to be agreed upon by fans and peers and everyone. I think the way you conduct yourself is a part of that as well. Like, I'm not saying you need to be a goody two shoes or you need to be like always a great sportsman, but I think that is definitely an element that most people will consider. And for me, the women's singles is very open. We've just come through the golden generation, and we still got some players from that, Yamaguchi being one of them, Chen Yufei being another, Young kind of came at the tail end, but we've also got another new generation of players coming up. And so I know that a lot of people are looking at Young as if she can win. She's only 23. I know she didn't play particularly well in this tournament. Still came away with the bronze. She's got plenty of time to, as we know, win another Olympics, win a few more World Championships, win more All Englands. If Young does that, it's going to be very difficult to vote against her. But I think right now, the GOAT debate is definitely up, and I would definitely have. I know Yamaguchi doesn't have an Olympic medal. I think both the last 2 Olympics, she's always unfortunately had injury issues a year or two or in the build-up towards it. She's always done really well and then something's hit. So people have been asking as well about whether Yamaguchi will go to LA 2028. I think she's quite relaxed about it. I think she takes things match by match. She's very much someone who wants to live in the present and isn't looking that too far ahead. I think by the time LA comes, she'll be 30, 31. So it's not out of the realms if she can continue the way she is. She still looks very... If she can stay healthy and fit, then definitely. And if she can maintain the level she's at, then she's going to be someone that could add an Olympic medal and maybe even more world titles. Who knows, playing the way she is, it's going to be really interesting. Women's singles has suddenly got a little bit more exciting. I think there's a few players now that can trouble Jiang. I think Jiang's going to come back even stronger from these worlds. She's definitely going to be going back to the drawing board. With her coaches, I think Park Ju-bong's definitely going to be going, right, what do we need to do? And Jiang's going to be right there with her. And with the new singles appointments in like Lee Hyun-il and all that stuff, I think she'll come back way better. Hopefully, I think Chen Yufei's, barring the ankle issue, she's coming on. She's getting back into some of the best form we've seen of her. I've already said Senna Yamaguchi. It's going to be really exciting. So I think the debate on the GOAT is definitely open. I think it's going to remain open for quite some time. I think the player, like I said, I think most people would agree, the player who's in the best position to really close that debate, in a way do what Lin Dan's done in the men's singles, is Jiang. But at the moment, definitely still an open one. How to explain the big French crash out in front of the home crowd? I'm a bit confused. I picked this question because I kind of want to refute it. I think really, if you look at it, outside of Alex Lanier, who didn't make his seeded position, he lost to Wang Hongyang. Everyone else in the French team did what their seeding should do, if not better. And even when they lost, they still performed brilliantly. So yes, Alex Lanier didn't make the quarterfinals as he was seeded to, losing to Wang Hongyang. But Wang Hongyang is one of those players that, as we know, very capable. Men's singles is incredibly open. And maybe the pressure got to Alex. Maybe Wang Hongyang just had a fantastic day. There's many factors that go into this. I wouldn't necessarily call it the crash out. But if we put Alex Lanier to one side, Christo Popov got to where he was seeded to almost, and maybe should have beaten Xiu Qi, the 1-on-1, the guy that won the whole thing. So the fact that he played brilliantly. We had the Popov brothers almost caused a massive upset against Man and T, a seeded pair. They had chances to defeat them in the second round or the first round? I think it was second round. Yeah, second round. So you can't see that's a bad result. Toma Jr. got to where he was supposed to and almost beat Anders Antonsen. I think the fact that he got through Ginting in the first round was a fantastic result. So again, you can't really see that as a bad thing, as a bad result. And then the mixed doubles, they were seeded 5 and they got to the semis, they got a bronze. They could have played a bit better in the semis. I think the situation got to them. I've already spoken about this. I think partly they lost because the Malaysians were just absolutely brilliant, but I think also they just were a little bit... I think the adrenaline got a little bit too much to them. They weren't able to play the kind of game that I think would have suited them more. I think they got a little bit wrapped up in the whole thing. But I think it's a little bit... I don't think I would call it a big French crash out in front of the home crowd. I think one medal... I think coming away with a medal was above and beyond what they probably expected. Yeah, I think people had maybe higher expectations because, so many seeded players and they've been playing well recently and obviously being on home soil. But I still think it was a great result and I still think a good performance from the French team. I think bar Alex Lanier, he's the only one that didn't get to where seeded wise, technically he should have done. So I think it's a little bit harsh to say that. That's why I wanted to answer that question. Next one. Would love a discussion of this mysterious alleged downwards drift, he said by E.G. Antonsen. Yeah, it is a mysterious one because I've never seen it before. We've seen drift. I think drift in general at this tournament was changing left, right, and centre. I mean, every match the commentators were trying to, even in the same session with each new match, they'd be like, what's the drift like now? Is it changing? There was some side-to-side drift I noticed. Front and back, the shuttles just maybe playing fast. Again, it changed so often, but this downwards drift definitely seemed to affect the further end. Again, I mentioned it a little earlier in passing, but how many times do we see a player jump up and then smash it into their feet? I think I saw one from almost every single match played. From that side, especially when we got down to the semis and the finals where there was one court. We saw it far more often. I don't know what was happening. Obviously there must be some sort of whether it's the aircon current or something. I have no idea. I cannot explain it, but it is rather strange. But I think the drift in general was strange. But yeah, no, Downs, I think even, I mean, Steve mentioned a few times, especially in singles, if you're below the tape playing a net shot, players touch and feel from those situations were difficult, which may be, again, drift pushing down. I don't know. It doesn't take much of a drift to affect the shuttle. But yeah, so it is a mysterious and a strange one. I'm not quite sure what more I can say, but it's definitely an odd one. Okay, so the next one. What happens to Jiang Zhengbang and Wei Xin after this? There's screenshots showing them being lectured by the coaches. Well, I think being lectured by the Chinese coaches, I think that's something you see most Asian players, or even all players, will get a debrief from their coaches after the matches. It's not just the Chinese players, but we've seen Chinese players. I've seen photos. I remember seeing other tournaments where, whether they won or lost, they'll have that kind of conversation. And of course, it was going to be a tough conversation because the way they performed in the final was not particularly good. I think, again, all credit to the Malaysians and the way they played, but the Chinese were not able to handle the situation at all. They weren't able to kind of find solutions to the obvious things that the Malaysians were doing. Their quality from below the tape, like I said, hitting upwards from a slight defensive situation wasn't very good. In terms of where do they go from here, I don't know whether you're implying whether they should split up again or not. I'm not so sure. Again, that's up for the Chinese coaches to decide upon. If they are to stick together, I do think that they need to kind of figure out, for me, they need to improve. Jiang Zhengbang needs to get a little better when he's forced to play to the front of the court, which I think he's going to have to do more of, because more pairs, if they can do that, they will watch that match and think, there's the blueprint. Not that I didn't think it was that obvious beforehand. I've always thought that's kind of the way against them. So I think they would need to, Jiang Zhengbang needs to improve his front court, but also his below the tape skills. When he's in the mid court and he's having to push through, I just think his quality from there could be so much better. I think they also need to figure out when they are in those worse situations, that worse formation where Wei Xin is being pinned to the back, they need to find out ways, things they can do to turn it around. Work out multiple ones for like different pairs, different conditions, different situations, whether they're on the left side of the court, the right side of the court, all sorts of things like that. I do think they need to kind of do some tactical scenario sort of training to kind of sort that out, if they're not doing that already. But I really do think they need to try to, because when they're on the attack and they're above the tape, they are an amazing pair. They're probably the best. But when they're forced into defense or forced into weaker formation or slightly below tape, well, not slightly below tape, a little bit more below tape, that quality is not so good. Also saying for Jiang Zhengbang, from those situations, a lot of good mixed players are able to, like, if there's a net, are able to kind of like, here, like tuck it in. Whereas his are always, they're just not quite as good. So yeah, just generally improving those areas. Next, do you think Victor Lai will be the next promising star after Alex and Aoi? So I've had a number of questions about Victor Lai. What makes him good? What do I think of his future, etc., etc. He is definitely a very promising player. I mean, that's a no-brainer. He's just reached, in his first ever World Championships, reached the semi-finals, and he played brilliantly in that semi-final. He had chances, 2 match points to make the final. That would have been absolutely insane. And the way he played, his attacking badminton, I think that could have been a really interesting final against Kunlavut, because Kunlavut is a little bit settled to players that have really good attack. That could have been interesting, but it didn't happen. But I don't think he's going to be the next. He is a promising player. And not many players would have known about him before this tournament, but I kind of had taken notice of him when he won the Pan Am Games, when he beat Brian Yang, and then obviously at the Canada Open, where he beat Kodai Naraoka. I can't remember who he lost to in that tournament eventually, but he did beat Kodai. And so yeah, of course, I think he's 20 years old, same age as Alex and Aoi. Obviously, you've got other players like that. The Chinese guy, who's An. And there's a few others. Obviously, the guy that I can't remember, he's a bit older, but he got to the final of the China Open recently. You know, I know he's a few years older, but there's a number of these players that we've seen emerge over the last year or two that are all young, this next generation, and I think Victor Lai has to be one of those. In terms of how he plays, obviously very, very attacking. He's like very long-limbed. Is it just me, or does he look like he's got arms way too long for his height? Like the angle that he can create on some of those smashes is lightning. But he reminds me of, like, I don't know why, I haven't seen the video in ages or watched him, but the guy that Xiu Qi, funnily enough, I think he beat in the Youth Olympics in 2014, his then teammate Lin Gupu or Gupi or something like that. He had that, like, this kind of like relaxed floaty style, and then he could just explode. And Victor Lai reminds me of that, as well as almost like a player from Hong Kong, like a Hu Yun or someone, you know, someone that's like looks really chill but can suddenly just explode into action. And I think what's also really frightening in terms of what his potential is that I think physically he's nowhere. I know he's 20, and players, you know, men won't get into their physical prime until probably like 24, 25. But if you compare him to like Aoi and Alex, which is mentioned in this question, physically he is so much more underdeveloped compared to them. The way he moves and plays, you know, he's a little bit. He could be a little more stable in his upper body and in general. He looks like a junior player, whereas like you look Alex and Aoi look like senior players, especially Alex. I know he's a bit of a genetic freak when it comes to physicality, but Victor Lai's got that junior look about him, yet, I mean, it's not like he's weak, don't get me wrong, but just when he really fills out and he becomes more stable, yeah, he's going to be a real handful for players. Yeah, no, I was absolutely impressed. I did actually mention him in my preview video, just to kind of keep an eye on him. I just thought that where he was positioned in the draw could open up, and it was kind of like the easier section of the draw, and I think he could have. I was not expecting him to get to the semis though. But having said that, I've seen a few people talk about the fact that he just had an easy draw, which again, you only beat who's in front of you, and it wasn't like he had that easy a draw. He just defeated very good players, and the fact that he almost beat Xiu Qi, who won it, I think kind of put that one to bed. But yeah, no, will he be the next promising player? He is definitely a promising player. Obviously, the World Championships will give him a hell of a lot of ranking points, to the point where I don't know how close he's going to be to the top 32, but I wouldn't be surprised if he can play with this sort of form, play a few more 300s and 500s, that he can get his ranking up by next year. We hopefully should be seeing him in the big tournaments, 750s and the 1000s. He should be joining Brian Yang for sure in those tournaments. So yeah, no, really excited to see what his future holds. Do you think Chen Yufei could have won if she didn't sprain her ankle? I mean, she could have, definitely. The way that she was playing in the semi-final against An Xiong was good, was really, really good. But I do think, like I said, when at length, is that I think Yamaguchi has the style and was playing with a more of an attacking mindset that I felt that An Xiong should do. That I still think, had Chen Yufei been able to move freely and move properly, that still would have caused her problems. I think it would have been a really good final. It's a real shame, because I think it could have been an absolute epic. Could she have won? Yes, but she could have also, I think Yamaguchi still could have won. I think you can't really say anything more than that. I think it definitely would have been. All I will say is it's a shame, because I think it would have been an absolutely ridiculously good final, and possibly could have eclipsed some of the other really amazing finals that we saw on Sunday. Can anyone stop Lu and Tan, and how? Yeah, I do think people. I mean, I know they're the world number ones. They've won like 6 of their last 7 tournaments or something like that, and now they're world champions, which I think will give them even more of a boost and even more confidence. But can they be stopped? Everyone can be stopped. I think Steen has spoken about at length, and I would agree that if you can focus a little bit more on Tan Ning than Liu Shingshu, it's not like you can't. It's not like Tan Ning's a bad player, but Liu Shingshu is definitely more of the playmaker, or the player that's a little bit in general a better player, can do more with the shuttle from both the front court and the back court. And I think as a result, if you're able to kind of get Tan Ning moving side to side, I think there's definitely some areas where you can expose. I think if you can defend it, like I said, the soft pushes, not the fast flat stuff. A lot of those ones pushes and then able to counter attack them that way, mixing that with like a high whip, so that basically Tan Ning, it makes Lu Shengxu harder to cover the front, but then Tan Ning also has to then move into the mid court, also cover, say, a cross lift. It's very difficult to do, but you can't just kind of like keep lifting it up or just only move Tan Ning side to side or only play to the front. You need to have a combination of all of them, because when we've seen pairs get successful against them, that's what they're able to do. They're able to play the soft gap shot. They're able to move Tan Ning around the back to maybe tire out, get her into a worse position. Then they're able to go in. Because I think if you can take Lu Shengxu out just for a few, we saw this in the final, she then tries to get herself involved, and then that opens up gaps there. So like Tan Ning's at the back, Lu Shengxu's here, but she's not getting many shuttles. She might try to come out to help or do something, and then that usually opens up gaps and that kind of thing. We did see the Malaysians able to do that at times, but they just weren't able to do it enough. They weren't able to capitalise on that, and it, like I said, it's very difficult. That's why it's not easy, because both players are fantastic and very difficult to get into those situations. I think also when you attack them, you need to be able to attack with a lot of variety, and a variety that can get your front player involved, because again, if their defence is so solid that they just feel comfortable and can just move you around the back, or you're not getting the front player, you're not going to hit many winners from the back of the court against them. You have to get the front player involved. So yeah, it's not like it's crazy complicated stuff, but it's very, very difficult. And I think there's a few pairs. I think the pairs that are very fast and nimble, like we have seen, I know they weren't able to do it anywhere near here, but Iwanaga and Nakanishi have been able to be successful with that. And I think we've seen Matsuyama and Shida maybe be successful with that. Yeah, it's difficult. You have to, I think, the quick speed is somewhere that Lu and Tan aren't as strong in. Okay, next one. What are possible areas of improvement for Kunlavut after his loss to Xu Qi? I think for Kunlavut, in all honesty, when it comes down to him, I think it's physical. I think that, again, he can keep going, he can fight hard, but in all honesty, I think if he was to just do, I don't want to say this because it sounds really, really horrible and really harsh, but I think he needs to be a bit lighter. I think he's a little too stocky for men's singles. I mean, obviously he makes up for it. He is fast, he's not slow, he's not unfit. Obviously we know his shot quality is absolutely phenomenal, but I think in these long drawn out matches, that extra weight is definitely going to affect him a little bit, and he just can't quite leap onto certain shots as much as maybe he could if he was a little physically better. I think I know that that's what Steen mentioned again, and Jill would agree that his physical preparedness could be a little bit better. You know, if you look at men's singles, you have to be, Shi is an absolute athlete, Cho Chi and Chen an athlete, or as Anders Anderson done really well, developed his physical side. I can even remember back to a motor when before his ban, he had that little bit of, maybe it's because he was a bit younger, but a little bit chubby, and then when he came back for his comeback, he looked so much more athletic, thinner, stronger, faster, and look how far his game came from there. I think Kunlavut kind of needs to do the same. Whether he will, we don't know. Again, for all players of this level and all pairs, the improvements are like the little things. I do think Kunlavut's ability to handle really fast attacking players also is obviously something he needs to improve on, but I do think it's not necessarily a racket skill thing or a vision thing, because he reads the game well and he's obviously got racket skills coming out of his arse. But physically, it gets a little bit much for him, and just carrying that little bit extra weight over an hour and a half, 2 hours can make quite a difference. So I would probably say that he needs to get physically a little better Doesn't have to be like the best. I think I'll put that out there. It doesn't need to be a Xu Qi or a Chou Chen, although that would be quite scary. But I do think if he could just trim up a bit and get that little bit leaner, a little bit faster, a little bit fitter, carrying a little bit less, because he's got really strong legs. Oh, he'd be quite a scary prospect. Yeah. So last question: what was your biggest surprise of the week? So I've picked 3. For me, the obvious one is Victor Lai. I don't think anyone saw him coming through to winning a medal. I could have seen him, upsetting, say like a Lu Guangzhou like he did, but then backing that up with more good results. So I think he's an obvious one. I was surprised by Seung and the way that she played. Not that she lost, although that obviously is a surprise, but it was more the way she played. I've already said that she wasn't attacking as much as I thought, or following up. She was kind of doing nothing. She was kind of like almost playing like she wanted Chen Yufei to lose it for her than she to win it. And what really surprised me was that after Chen Yufei rolled her ankle, that Seung didn't then try to capitalise on that even further. She kind of went within herself again and kind of let Chen Yufei get back in. I think actually really kind of pushed that forward. That maybe Chen Yufei, a bit like what I know it was the next day, it's a bit different, but what Yamaguchi did when Chen Yufei tried that a little bit more in the start of the second to really give it like her last chance, and Yamaguchi just basically weathered that storm, was like no, and just carried on, kept doing what she's doing, and then Chen Yufei kind of like, oh, okay, it's not my day. I think Seung could have done something like that. It was really, really strange. I've never quite seen her like that, especially considering she had no taping on her knee. I've heard no reports that she was unwell or off. I mean, if I've missed something, do let me know. But that for me was a real surprise. Not the fact that she actually lost, but it was more how she lost, the way that she played that surprised me. And the last one was Chen Tangji and Tui Wei. Like I already said, I was quite surprised. Obviously the reports, it was the first final this year, the split, all the reports of their not quite being unified. As I always thought that was one of their strongest points back in the day, but obviously I've heard reports it wasn't. And so I didn't even pick them to medal when they've gone on one and beaten a Chinese pair in the mixed doubles. They've won Malaysia their first world title in the mixed doubles discipline, the first final in that discipline. They did it on Independence Day, National Independence Day for Malaysia. Yeah, it was a real surprise, and the way they played, they were like I said to you, I was waiting for that moment where maybe 1 or 2 errors happened, and then it all those things I'd heard about came back to the surface. But no, it was like the opposite. They brushed it off. They looked unified again. It was just really, really surprising. So yeah. Those would be my 3 biggest surprises of the week. I'm probably sure there's some others. So yeah, actually, I'll put that question over to you. What was your biggest surprise of the week? You can give me 1, 2, 3, as many as you like. I think that's quite a good question to turn over to you as well. And with that, I'm going to end this video. I've been talking as usual for far too long. This was a bit of a difficult one because I made so many notes on so many matches, and I watched so much badminton. And I do apologise sometimes when I'm talking. I do have my notes in front of me, but I lost my train of thought. Maybe some bits are a little bit incoherent, but I've tried my best. As always, just my humble opinion. If I've missed anything, feel free to add it in the comments, or you want to just add anything, ask me any further questions. I'll tend to follow on. It was a really, really entertaining World Championships. Lots of really good matches, lots of upsets, lots of cool stories, and like I said, whilst there were those controversies that I've seen flooded around the internet, and it sparks up the debate about VAR and all that stuff, and I agree that I think we need to have something that can further assist the umpires. I don't think we should belittle the umpires too much. It's a thankless job what they're trying to do, and it's not just because they don't get paid or they get paid minimum. They might get their travel and accommodation covered, but badminton is really, very hard. They've got to look out for a number of things, and of course they're going to miss things. They're going to make mistakes, and sometimes we always what I notice online is we constantly bring up the mistakes they make, but we hardly ever bring up the things they get right. And I saw a number of calls like double hits or net kills or other situations that were correct, and we don't go, oh wow, look how good that umpire is. But as soon as they make one bad call, oh look how bad they are, this is terrible, what are BWF doing? It annoys me a little bit, to be honest, when I see these comments. I get it, the frustration, and again, I think the frustration stems from the fact that there's an obvious solution, which is VAR, which I do think we need. A challenge system on some of the umpires' calls. I'm not trying to say that we don't need that. You know me, I do. But when we're just constantly highlighting these bad things because of one bad situation by one umpire or something, but then we don't, it's just, I don't know. I feel kind of bad for the umpires. You know, I feel bad for the players, but it's not an easy job. And I think when it comes to these ones, I think we can say, yes, that was the bad call. Of course, there's some that are terrible calls. There will be terrible calls from time to time. Do not get me wrong. But sometimes on like a net kill one, you know, or whatever. But yeah, okay, I'm spinning around here. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching the video. Like I said, add your comments in the comment section below. I'll do my best to answer as many of your questions as you can. If you want to purchase any Beckman's Breakdown merchandise, you can do so in using the link in the description below. Plenty more content to come plenty more content to come from me. I'm not quite sure when the next, I haven't looked that far ahead, when the next big tournament is for one of these videos, but I am in the process of starting a new series called Behind the Badminton. I did the first one on the 1997 Men's Singles World Final. You can find that on my channel. I will be doing more of those. Those videos I should be able to get out a little more consistently, and they'll also be a little bit shorter in length. So for any of you out there that hate these long videos, I do have some content for you. So anyway, I've spoken for long enough. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.